is making energy-saving stoves and closing that kind of energy loop of making the waste charcoal dust from the cities, using that to regrow new trees back in the places that are cut down from. That sort of philosophically was a really, really good step forward.
Wonderful, wonderful, kind of joining that circle up. So how do you get the seeds to where they need to be? Because you've got to cover quite a lot of terrain, haven't you?
Yeah, so it's very interesting, actually. There are a million different ways of doing it, we've come to find. The basic tenets really are making sure you get the right type of tree to the right place. So you always ask the people who are buying them, what's being cut down in your backyard? If you say they're cutting down acacia tortilis trees, then plant more of that same type because it grows there naturally and it's being overexploited. We've worked from anywhere between community groups doing like a Sunday cleanup in small towns to helicopter pilots of conservation organizations like Mara Elephant Project and Big Life Foundation, being able to build in seed distribution in their day-to-day work. And so the beauty of it sort of is that if you are traveling anywhere to somewhere and you know what type of trees are under threat and you're able to replant those same seeds as you're doing your other work, it lowers the cost of doing all of this substantially because logistics are what plays a very big part of the expense.
Teddy Kianjui there, and his light bulb moment. If you want to keep the critters off your seeds, cover them in charcoal. He was talking to me from Nairobi. He's the co-founder of Seed Balls Kenya.
Time to talk food now and the growing importance of meat alternatives. It's a very fast-growing market, and we've seen and spoken about alternative sausages, alternative mince, even chicken. Steak, however, has proved to be a bit of a problem because of its texture, apparently, but our next guest thinks he's found a way around this. Esjar Ben-Shatrit is the CEO of Redefine Meat and joins us now about a 3D printing solution. So what is it about steak that makes it a mimic challenge, and how have you got round that?
Hi, so first, happy to be here. Steak is the most complicated food that we eat because we had an animal spending a few years building it for us as a muscle. And it's a structure that is only in the nature found, but we want to recreate it without using the animal. So we had to come up with a new machine, a new process. It's a 3D printer, but much more complicated and relevant for the problem we're trying to solve than a plastic 3D printer.
Right, and what are you printing with? You're printing with some organic material, sort of vegetable-based matter.
Just like the muscle of an animal, we take proteins and fat and molecules that give you flavor that are from nature, from plants, and we structure them in a way that is very similar to the muscle of an animal, which is only important because then in your mouth it tastes and behaves like a steak. And then your brain has a trigger, I'm eating meat. I'm eating something that came out of an animal.
Right, and it's the way that you build it up with the printer that, I mean, because otherwise I'd imagine you mix this in a vat or knead it like dough. I mean, I'm not an expert, I don't know how, but what is it about the 3D printing that works so well, in your opinion?
Imagine lining fibers of a plant-based protein that gives you a firm texture and planting small dots of fat within it that gives you juiciness and melt while it cooks, and coating everything with a thick layer of what we call blood that is very red and juicy, that every bite bursts in your mouth with textures, flavors, and a mouthfeel that is only found in meat. This is very, very critical for human beings. We know it. It's a part of our DNA to recognize this experience and to love it. So when people eat it, they feel it's meat, and it's only possible because of this layering process of a 3D printing,
which comes from the printing.
Extremely accurate.
Okay, cool. That's interesting. I mean, obviously, it's a premium product, steak. It's worth money. Does that help the economics of this? Tell us how it works. How much more would it cost me to have steak and chips produced by you than produced by a cow?
Sure. So first, it's a premium product, but it's the biggest part of the industry because we grow cows for the steaks and not for the meat applications. That's the moneymaker of the meat industry, and that's the giant industry that we're trying to address. 3D printing plant-based meat today is cheaper than growing the same cut of meat in a cow because it takes a few minutes to have a steak. And because the ingredients are very efficient. A cow is an inefficient machine to make food. So it's not only that we have the same texture and the same flavor and same experience. Today we are at price parity with a steak from an animal.
So you're saying the economics work already. Thank you very much indeed. That's why they're getting a lot of investors. Redefine Meat, the CEO there, Eschar Ben Shatrit. Many thanks indeed for joining us. This is Newsday. Lawrence and Claire back after the news.
A BBC World Service and American Public Media co-production with iHeartMedia.
What attracts one person to another? Does having too many choices make us less likely to be happy? I'm Dessa, and I'm finding out why you do what you do.
When you give people too much of a good thing, instead of being liberated by it, they get paralyzed.
First up, dating.
Why do you fall for him or her?
Deeply Human. Sunday at 10 GMT. And in an hour, Hard Talk with Stephen Sacker.
My guest is the music promoter extraordinaire, Harvey Goldsmith. Live music, like the rest of the arts sector, has been clobbered by COVID, and there's a Brexit impact too. So what will it take to restore our cultural fabric?
This is the BBC World Service, the world's radio station.
Hello, welcome. You're listening to Newsday on the BBC World Service. Great to have your company. Claire McDonnell and Lawrence Pollard with you.
We're going to be talking about COVAX, the vaccine sharing scheme that is getting underway in many countries this week, including Ghana and Ivory Coast. We'll be live in Accra, hearing from the health authorities there.
We'll also look at how President Biden will handle future relations with Saudi Arabia following the release of a declassified report that concluded the de facto ruler of the kingdom, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, had approved the killing of Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi.
Former US President Donald Trump is back. He's been talking in public for the first time since he left the White House. He says he isn't going to be starting his own political party, but he might run in 4 years' time.
We will have the sports news and the business news live from Hong Kong with Andrew Wood as well. All coming up here on Newsday, BBC World Service. Stay with us. We're back after the latest world news.
Hello, this is Danielle Yawowiecka with the BBC News. Protesters are back on the streets of Yangon, Myanmar's largest city, a day after 18 were killed by the security forces. The demonstrators remain defiantly opposed to last month's military coup. Memorial services are being held for the dead. The detained civilian leader Aung San Suu Kyi has appeared in court via video link in the capital Naypyidaw. Jonathan Head has the latest.
She's now appearing in court, and they have applied another 2 charges to the one she already has of possessing illegal walkie-talkies and not observing COVID restrictions during the election campaign last year. I mean, this is a show trial. It's a farce, but in a way, that won't stop the military. They're charging her and President Win Myint, the former head of state, who was her ally. She's not been seen in public since she was detained right after the coup. She's not been able to see or even speak to her lawyer, and her lawyer has had to spend the last couple of weeks moving from house to house to avoid being detained himself.
Donald Trump has used his first speech since leaving the White House to reassert his claim to the leadership of the Republican Party. Addressing a right-wing conference in Florida, he dismissed the idea of forming a new party and suggested he would stand for president again in 2024. Mr. Trump repeated his false claim that he was the real winner of November's election and railed against Joe Biden.
Within his first few hours, Biden eliminated our national security travel bans on nations plagued by terrorism. His first priority was to open our borders to unvetted travelers from Libya, Yemen, Syria, Somalia, and many other countries where strict vetting cannot occur, countries that have tremendous problems.
The Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi has had a coronavirus vaccine shot at the start of the second phase of India's vaccination campaign. From today, the over 60s and people over 45 with medical conditions will be able to get their first shot, but many remain reluctant. Hundreds of protesters have gathered outside a court in Hong Kong, where 47 pro-democracy activists are to face charges of conspiracy to commit subversion. The activists were arrested under the national security law imposed by China's central government. Danny Vincent is in Hong Kong.
Some held up banners calling for the release of political prisoners. They chanted banned political slogans that once filled the streets during the days of protest. The 39 men and 8 women are facing charges of conspiracy to commit subversion. The charges are linked to an unofficial primary poll last year that aimed to select opposition candidates for a legislative election. All now face possible prison sentences.
You're listening to the World News from the BBC. France's former president, Nicolas Sarkozy, is due to learn the verdict today in his trial on corruption charges. President from 2007 until 2012, Mr Sarkozy is accused of offering a judge a plum job in return for inside information on an investigation into his campaign finances. He denies the charges. Whatever the outcome, Mr Sarkozy faces a number of other investigations. The New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern has urged people to inform on COVID restriction rule breakers. Ms Ardern said some people involved in the latest outbreak that's pushed the City of Auckland back into lockdown had ignored clear instructions to remain in isolation and had not disclosed their movements. But she said that while some people did dumb things, New Zealand would not get through coronavirus difficulties if wrongdoers were pilloried to the point they did not tell the truth. There's significant anger that one family's actions has put Auckland's 1.7 million people into a one-week lockdown. The Nigerian-American Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala starts work as the new head of the World Trade Organization today. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala has said that addressing the health and economic consequences of the pandemic would be a key priority. There are concerns about China's trade policies and how well-equipped the WTO is to deal with them. The road movie Nomadland, about marginalised Americans living in vans, has won the Best Drama Award at the Golden Globes. Chloe Zhao, who made the film, also won Best Director. The late actor Chadwick Boseman scooped Best Actor for the period blues drama Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, 6 months after he died of cancer at the age of 43. His widow Simone accepted the award on his behalf.
He would thank God. He would thank his parents. He would thank his ancestors for their guidance and their sacrifices.
BBC News.
Thank you for the latest news. Hello, welcome. You're listening to Newsday from the BBC World Service. Claire McDonnell and Lawrence Pollard will have a more in-depth look at all the winners at the Golden Globes coming out of LA overnight. We're also going to, in a moment, hear from health authorities in Ghana rolling out the COVID vaccine there. We'll also hear from a lawyer about how that lawyer would like to see President Bush respond to the murder of Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi, because President Biden is going to be making a statement later today about future relations with the Middle East and Saudi Arabia in particular. And we will also hear this half hour from the author Sir Kazu Ishiguro on his first novel since winning the Nobel Prize for Literature in 2017. Do get in touch with myself and Lawrence on anything you hear on the programme. We love to read your comments. This is the text number you need. It is +44 77 86 20 50 85.
Well, we begin with important news in the fight against the coronavirus pandemic. The COVAX scheme, which is basically aimed at delivering more than 2 billion doses of coronavirus vaccine to people in 190 countries over the coming year, is rolling out in West Africa, Ghana and Côte d'Ivoire. That means that hundreds of thousands of life-saving doses will be distributed as part of this global collaboration to try to spread the vaccine as far as possible around the country, and not just in the rich countries, which have hogged quite a lot of the early production. Let's speak now to the Director General of the Ghana Health Service, Dr. Patrick Aboagye. Dr. Aboagye, thank you for joining us. This is obviously a big moment. There's a bit of sort of good-looking PR with senior politicians getting the jab and so on. But after that, what happens? What's the timetable?
Oh, thank you very much. The timetable, our program has been segmented into 4 key areas. The first group is the health workers and some essential services, including the arms of government and other areas. The second group will be vulnerable, which is still like a link up with the vulnerable over 60s, those who have comorbidity, hypertension, diabetes, and obesity will be among the first group of people to be vaccinated. And then we have the next group of other essential services, including utility services, etc., who are all part of the general public. And then the fourth group will be the children and pregnant women, as at the time we get vaccines that are suitable for them, then they'll be rolling. Otherwise, that's the thing. So the plan is to move towards the first phase of vaccinating about 20 million out of the 31 million Ghanaians. And 11 million will constitute the group that we cannot be reached because of the current vaccines are not meant for children.
I was going to ask, it's interesting that you have children there because we often overlook the need. No one really talks about the need to vaccinate children. Now, 20 million is the first target. You've got 600,000 vaccines delivered.
Yes. Yeah.
Are you going to have vaccines as fast as you can inject them? I mean, or is the injection process going to have to wait while you get more supply?
There are multiple approaches. The COVAX supply, we expect to have another batch early March. And now we have the African supply platform, medicine platform under the AU that have also secured some doses that should be coming in. Government is making bilateral contact with other agencies to see how we can procure as a nation. The private sector in Ghana is also mobilizing to buy for the state. And so we have all these multiple approaches coming in.
Right, that's interesting. So the private sector is involved, but it only distributes through the state. You're not going to get a twin track. It's not like some people are going to be able to go private and jump the timetable.
No, currently they are all under emergency use authorization, and so that is a state-led. And so the private sector may procure and bring it in, but the state will keep and deploy.
What do you think about the issue of supply? I mean, would there be enough vaccine out there available now for you to vaccinate your entire country? How much longer is Ghana going to have to wait than that ideal situation?
Our current plan stems from now till about October. We expect that by October, we would have been able to, by June, we would have done the first 20 million, and by October, we would have completed the entire country. That's all the 31 million people who would have been vaccinated.
And it just starts now with a single step. So this is quite a moment, Patrick. What are your feelings about it? A bit daunted?
Well, I think we have planned since October, and so we have all our plan. We have our digital system to enter all our data, and we have the segments ready available for vaccination. Our only hope is that the supplies that have been promised come in as promised, and so that we'll be able to stick to our timetable and vaccinate as many people in the shortest possible time, so that we can be able to get above this this horrendous disease that is ravaging not just the health sector but also the whole economy of the country.
Hear, hear. Good to talk to you. Thank you, Patrick. That's Dr. Patrick Abwagi, who is Director General of the Ghana Health Service. Would love to talk more, actually, with Patrick, but we don't have the time, obviously. Also about Africa's experience, why morbidities have been what they are, how the second and possibly third waves are going to hit and affect as well. Lots of coverage of that, by the way, on the BBC website as well. Lots of background on the science. And also, don't forget, Africa Daily. Alan Kasuja talks about vaccine myths and tries to nail some of those issues as well.
Newsday BBC World Service. Now, last Friday, a declassified US intelligence report was released relating to the murder of Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi in Istanbul in 2018. It concluded that the de facto ruler of the kingdom, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, had approved the killing. And President Joe Biden says he will make an announcement on Saudi Arabia later today. So what can we expect? I've been talking to Amrit Singh, a lawyer with Open Society Justice Initiative. And this was the group that filed a lawsuit to have that intelligence report released.
To be honest, it really is a disappointment that the Biden administration has not imposed sanctions on the murderer-in-chief, the Crown Prince. And the fact that the administration has imposed sanctions on all of the other lower-ranking officials identified, but left the Crown Prince off the list is striking and a glaring omission, because it sends the message that the Crown Prince can essentially get away with murder. And his role in the systematic persecution of dissidents is essentially irrelevant, and that the United States turns a blind eye to his role in this murder.
Some say, though, that by sanctioning his aides and his officials, he will get the message. And Saudi Arabia is a country that America has a lot of tie with. It's a delicate balancing act, is it not?
I don't think so. I think that it is essential with a crime of this gravity that the ringleader of the murder be held to account.
But we are going to hear more from the Biden administration later today on Saudi. What do you want to hear?
We want the Biden administration to impose sanctions on the Crown Prince, the full range of sanctions, travel bans, an asset freeze. And we want the Biden administration to impose an arms embargo with respect to Saudi Arabia. The temporary freeze announced is precisely that. It's a temporary freeze. The fact of the matter is that a regime such as Saudi Arabia should not receive any arms until such time that Saudi Arabia stops engaging in the human rights violations of this kind.
We have seen major steps, though, haven't we? The fact that this intelligence report was released, there are certain bits redacted still. It must give you hope that a very short time into the Biden administration, they are sending out very clear messages that this kind of behaviour is not going to be tolerated.
We welcome the release of the report. There's no question, but it's not enough. It does end the cover-up that the Trump administration engaged in for more than 2 years with respect to the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. But it is crucial that it be followed up with decisive action, not only on the part of the United States, but also the UK and other US allies.
As far as his family are concerned, though, is it realistic to think that anyone will ultimately face prosecution for his murder, the people ultimately responsible?
There are universal jurisdiction laws in various countries around the world that entitle prosecutors and judges to investigate individuals like the Crown Prince. So I think the Crown Prince will have to watch out for the efforts of law enforcement around the world, lest he be traveling somewhere and be arrested on a warrant that was issued pursuant to one of these universal jurisdiction laws in one of these countries.
Stark warning there from Amrit Singh on the movements around the globe of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman of Saudi Arabia. Amrit is a lawyer with Open Society Justice Initiative who pushed for the Biden administration to release that intelligence report. And President Biden will make an announcement later today on Saudi Arabia. We will bring that to you here on BBC World Service.
Big friend of Saudi Arabia, of course, was the previous President Donald Trump, and the Donald is back. I wonder how much you've missed him. In case you need a reminder, he's all about the election which was stolen. Joe Biden is a disaster. The Democrats are a threat to the American way of life, and it's no longer America first, but America last under the new administration. He hasn't been on Twitter. He's been standing up at a conference in front of the faithful, whom he promised there will be a third victory. Yes, that's right, a third victory against the Democrats in 2024.
With your help, we will take back the House. We will win the Senate. And then a Republican president will make a triumphant return to the White House. And I wonder who that will be.
The occasion was a regular Conservative conference in Florida called CPAC, the Conservative Political Action Conference. One important message was that the Republican Party will continue to be his vehicle. There had been talk about Trump setting up a third party. No, why, as he asked, would I split the right-wing US vote? We've been speaking about how this all looked with political strategist Lucy Caldwell. Now, she's one of those Republican operators who's run campaigns at all levels, carried out polling, operated the machinery of elections. She was not a Trump loyalist. So what was she seeing happening at CPAC?
Donald Trump said, "Did you miss me?" And the crowd cheered. And I think for his audience, and it wasn't just the CPAC audience, it was the audience watching at home and the media and the so-called Republican establishment and Democrats and really all Americans. This was a sign that the Republican Party is going to stay the course with Trump and with what we may call Trumpism. and that he is not going anywhere and will continue to be the dominant force in Republican politics for the foreseeable future.
So no alternative party. He's owning the party in a way. How Trump loyal is the party?
One of the things Donald Trump did after 2016 is that he did everything he could to make the Republican Party as faithful and loyal to him as possible. He controls the lists for fundraising. He controls the technology. It is an enormous asset, and he is shrewd not to think even for a second of ceding that to anyone else. Donald Trump is the manifestation of the total and utter rot of the Republican Party. So maybe he will run. I don't think whether it's Donald Trump or Ted Cruz or Mike Pence or Don Jr., I don't think it matters so much. What's important is that the Republican Party is going to continue to go down this path. Joe Biden so far is proving to be a fairly popular president. He has a very solid approval rating. He's governing from the center. Donald Trump highlighted a few key things that are hot button issues. He preyed upon people's feeling that Democrats want to defund the police, that it's going to be lawlessness in the streets. He preyed upon people's fears that girls' sports are going to be taken over in a sort of politically correct culture of acceptance of transgender Americans. And all of those things, I think, are a preview of how the Republican Party is going to message going forward, which is Democrats are a threat to your American way of life.
What does it mean for you? Has your Republican Party left you now?
Yeah, I think that for a lot of so-called never Trump Republicans or former Republicans, the hard truth is that the party split from people whose views resemble mine a long time ago, before I'd even realized it. But the people who were cheering for Trump in that room today, they were there then. There were those fringes that we would have said are fringe groups. They were present then. We had convinced ourselves that they were not driving the train, and they are. So I think that when one comes to terms with these sorts of shifts, it's important to be honest about the fact that we should have seen Trump coming long before he came down that escalator.
And we all remember that moment. Political strategist Lucy Caldwell there. Let's get the sports news. Here's Al.
And after all the controversy surrounding the African Champions League matches involving South African sides not being given visas to enter Algeria or Morocco, the threats not to travel to neutral territory to play the rearranged fixtures, they have finally happened. Mamelodi Sundowns 5-1 winners over Algeria's CS Belouizdad, who played almost the entire game in Dar es Salaam with 10 men. Kaizer Chiefs humbled 4-0 by Wydad Casablanca in Ouagadougou. The Chinese Super League champions Jiangsu FC have been shut down by their owners. The club won their first title in November, but owners Su Ning say they will cease operating immediately as the company focuses on the retail arm. And in the Premier League, Manchester United boss Ole Gunnar Solskjaer claimed refereeing decisions were being affected by outside influences after his side denied a penalty for a clear handball in their goalless draw with Chelsea.
Thank you, Al Ross. Let's get the business now. Andrew Wood is standing by at the business desk in Hong Kong. Andrew.
Yeah, well, President Joe Biden scored his first legislative victory over the weekend. You may remember the House of Representatives approved his coronavirus relief package. That was worth $1.9 trillion. So what comes next? Let's talk now to Mark Ostwald, who's chief economist at ADM ISI. Good morning to you, Mark. What does come next? Is this money going to change the course of the American economy and make sure that it comes out of the coronavirus pandemic unscathed?
Well, first of all, we're going to have to see what amendments are made in the Senate, because it still has to pass in the Senate. And once it is going to be amended, above all, the demand for a minimum wage being doubled to $15 is going to be taken out. There will be other amendments, and it will have to go back to the House. The most important thing, though, really is the timing, because there are a whole load of benefit packages which are due to expire in the middle of the month. So there is some pressure there. Will it change the American economy? I think we talk about this as a stimulus package. It's not really a stimulus package at all. It's a support package. The stimulus package would really come much later in the year when Mr. Biden outlines his infrastructure spending package, and that would be something very critical there. As with everywhere else, I think the key issue here is always this balancing act that governments have to make, and indeed central banks, to balance out how if we do get the promised recovery as the vaccine rollout increases, when do they start to withdraw some of these support measures? And the answer is, the key thing is going to be wait rather than make haste to do that, because otherwise a lot of these recoveries could actually be, I wouldn't say necessarily stop dead in their tracks, but certainly unseated.
Now, there's always the worry when governments start spending lots of money. Traditionally, economists get worried about inflation. Is there any sign that pumping $1.9 trillion into the economy is going to start prices rising and getting out of control?
I mean, this is a really tricky one because at the moment what we've got, we'll see in the first half of the year, we'll see a lot of base effects from last year where prices fell coming through and inflation will rise. That is expected to be largely transitory. However, what we are seeing in pretty much any sector you care to think of, be it food, be it energy, be it industrial metals, is a lot of supply chain disruptions. Now, some of those, most of those related either to weather effects in case of agriculture or COVID disruptions. The question is, are those going to be proved to be enduring? In which case...
Okay, we'll have to watch that over the next year. Mark Oswald at ADMN ISI, thanks for joining us on Newsday.
Andrew, thanks very much indeed. Now, it's one of the most anticipated books of the year, Clara and the Sun by Kazu Ishiguro. It's his first novel since winning the Nobel Prize for Literature in 2017, and it is about a robot or an artificial friend called Clara. In his first broadcast interview about this new novel, he's been talking to our arts correspondent, Rebecca Jones.
Now, I haven't written one of these stories about some treacherous, sinister robot that takes over the family and then all her mates take over the world. It's not one of those stories at all. I think AI will bring enormous benefits, but I do have great worries as well. Like, what do we do about the employment situation when the majority of us are not working anymore?
Can you see a time when robots will replace human writers and put you out of a job?
Yeah, I can. I think the point when an AI program, not a robot, but an AI program can write a novel, let us say, that can make me cry. That shows that AI can understand human emotions and it has the capacity for empathy. And when it can do that, it means that it could come up with the next big idea, like communism or Nazism or capitalism.
In a career spanning 4 decades, Kazuo Ishiguro has written 8 novels, including the Booker Prize-winning The Remains of the Day, which was turned into a film.
Please leave me alone, Miss Kenton.
Why won't you show me your book?
This is my private time.
His dystopian drama Never Let Me Go, about human clones whose organs are harvested for transplant, was also adapted for the big screen.
You have to know who you are and what you're created to do.
I reread that book a few years ago and I thought, it's a terribly sad book. I thought, why doesn't the author of this book cheer up a bit? And I think possibly as I've got older, I've kind of got a little bit more jolly. And so Clara is such a character.
Mom, Clara's the one I want. One moment, Josie. Then she asked manager, every artificial friend is unique, right? That's correct, ma'am, and particularly so at this level.
We've seen a number of freedom of speech disputes recently and publishers coming under pressure to drop authors because of their views. I wondered, were there any subjects now that you would feel you couldn't write about?
I think I'm in a privileged and relatively protected position because I'm a very established author and I'm the age I am. I very much fear for the younger generation of writers. And what I'm concerned about is that there isn't self-censorship going on and that they would not produce the works that they really want to produce or they would have produced that we would really value. Because there is a fear that they're going to get trolled, or that they're going to get cancelled, or there's going to be some sort of anonymous lynch mob that will turn up online.
Kazu Izikuru talking to our arts correspondent, Rebecca Jones, about his new book, one of the most anticipated books of this year, Clara and the Sun. That's his first novel since winning the Nobel Prize for Literature in 2017. Lawrence, the robots are coming, or rather they're here.
I've got to say, maybe he's cheered up. Maybe his books are cheered up because he won the Nobel Prize. Surely that would cheer anyone up, wouldn't it?
Put a smile on your face, yeah.
You're listening to the BBC World Service.
The wave of lockdown.
Thought we were going to be in lockdown for 2 or 3 weeks. Who would have known?
We get all of our groceries delivered. I teach from my computer.
It's not to go out of the house as much as possible.
In a world that's constantly changing, we keep you informed by looking forward.
Alternative fuels, fuel from fish guts, a bus powered by the remains of coffee grains.
This project basically converting threats into opportunity.
And back.
How are we going to meet and overcome this danger? By industry, by enterprise, by endurance.
Bringing you the latest updates and an in-depth look at the technology that's shaping our world.
The algorithms that are running our lives, how this affects our bodies, our identity.
It was so successful that it started to stretch the limits.
Technology, data and communications will underpin economic and political power this century.
Tech. Across the BBC World Service.
Hello, welcome to Newsday from the BBC World Service with Lawrence Pollard and Claire MacDonald.
Coming up, the COVAX vaccine sharing scheme is delivering its first doses to African countries. The rollout of COVID-19 gets underway today.
Yeah, we'll be talking about that. Also, you'll hear from the WHO, who are partly behind that. And we also talk about the first virtual Golden Globes Awards. Chadwick Boseman, the first posthumous black winner.
BBC News with Jerry Smith. Protesters are back on the streets of Yangon, Myanmar's largest city, a day after 18 were killed by the security forces. The demonstrators remain defiant in their opposition to last month's military coup. Memorial services are being held for the dead. The detained civilian leader, Aung San Suu Kyi, has appeared in court via video link in the capital Naypyidaw. Donald Trump has used his first major political speech since his chaotic departure from the White House to reassert control of the Republican Party. In a speech to activists, he repeated his false claim that he was the real winner of November's election and hinted that he may run for president again in 2024. The Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi has had a coronavirus vaccine shot at the start of the second phase of India's mass vaccination campaign. Mr. Modi tweeted a picture of himself being injected with the Indian-made Covaxin. He urged everyone eligible to do the same. Hundreds of protesters have gathered outside a court in Hong Kong where 47 pro-democracy activists are due to face charges of conspiracy to commit subversion. The charges relate to an unofficial primary poll last year that aimed to select opposition candidates for a legislative election. Clearly frustrated, the New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern has urged people to inform on COVID restriction rule breakers. Ms Ardern said some people involved in the latest outbreak that's pushed the city of Auckland back into lockdown had ignored clear instructions to remain in isolation. The late film star Chadwick Boseman has won the Best Actor award at the Golden Globe ceremony for his performance in Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. The Netflix show, The Crown, about the British royal family, won the Best TV Drama Series. BBC News.
Many thanks for the latest, Jerry. This is Newsday. Claire and Lawrence with you. We're talking more about that vaccination programme getting underway in West Africa, all part of the COVAX global vaccine programme. People demonstrating in Myanmar just a day after 18 were shot in an escalation of violence by the police and army. We'll be talking about the Golden Globes, and it's not just celebrity fluff. There's a lot of diversity issues going on there. And in the sports news, solidarity for Tiger Woods. And also, how can a champion club just cease to exist? That's what happened to the football champs in China. All that coming up here on Newsday.
Yes, let's continue the conversation on that big moment in Africa today, the fight against coronavirus, with the Ivory Coast, which is starting its vaccination campaign today, along with Ghana. The country received 500,000 doses of the AstraZeneca vaccine shipped from India. It's all part of this COVAX initiative to provide at least 2 billion doses of the vaccine by the end of this year. Let's talk to Richard Mehigo, Immunisation and Vaccine Development Manager at the WHO Regional Office for Africa, who joins us on the line now. Welcome to the programme. Good to have your company. It's a significant day in West Africa. Your impression of how the rollout is going so far?
Well, thank you very much for your invitation. Indeed, this is a very good day and big day for the African region with the rollout of the first vaccines that have been provided through COVAX in the region. And these are things that people have been waiting for quite some time now. And it's really the beginning of a long journey for rolling out the vaccine and fulfilling the equity promise of COVAX.
Yes, and equity is a key word, isn't it, really? Because there has been a wait for poorer countries to get this vaccine. It's the AstraZeneca vaccine from India, 500,000 doses. So talk us through who will get them.
The first priority groups is going to be the healthcare workers who are on the front line. As you know, the healthcare workers have been disproportionately affected by the vaccine by the disease compared to the general population. So it's just justice to make sure that the frontline workers are protected while they are taking care of other people. And after that, it will be people living with comorbidities who are going to be prioritized as a second group. And as more vaccine will become available, because there will be a rolling delivery of vaccines, and then more priority group are going to be added to the list.
Okay, and this is the start, which is great. But, you know, we've got 2 countries receiving these vaccines from COVAX, 50-odd countries on the continent to go. So where do we go next with this? Where does the pressure need to be exerted?
Well, I think this is the beginning, as you said, and we are hoping the acceleration of this movement with tomorrow, having Nigeria, DRC getting their first installment as well. We're expecting 4 million doses in Nigeria, followed by additional 13 countries. So where really the pressure needs to be made, I think it's to make sure that countries, particularly in the north, that have excess dose, can also make those surplus available to some of the low-income countries that have not yet started vaccination. I think there is a real huge demand of vaccine on the continent, and unfortunately, the number of doses available are still very limited.
So what do you think needs to change going forward? We were talking earlier in the programme to one of the people who came up with the COVAX idea. He was saying, you know, his criticism was that richer countries have cleared the shelves. If you look at the UK has bought enough doses of vaccine to vaccinate its population 4 times over, Canada 5 times over, and they will hang on to those doses until their populations have been immunised. So what needs to change going forward? He was suggesting maybe loosen up the patents, you know, give patents to other countries so they can start manufacture, because clearly in Africa we need to move quicker than the rollout would suggest we are going to.
No, absolutely. So loosening up the patent for local manufacturers could be a solution, but this will be a long-term solution, because by the time the vaccine plants are set up, it may be a bit late. So I think what is needed now, as you have said, for rich countries that are holding the vaccines and keeping them, I think it's time to share those doses. I think that's very important. And the COVAX facility itself was, by the way, created with the promise of a global equity, so that people can be vaccinated at the same time everywhere. And it is only that way that we can definitely prevent the spread of the disease further. Because if even rich countries that have immunized, like in the UK, a big part of their population I think we could be surprised by new variants that could emerge because, yes, the virus is still circulating. So it is
very interesting. You should,
not only
one of the stories in today's press here in the UK is the fact that somebody has travelled to the UK and has brought in the Brazil variant. So clearly borders are porous, and it's something that the world needs to get on top of. Thank you so much for joining us. Richard Mihaigo, Immunisation and Vaccine Development Manager at the WHO Regional Office for Africa.
22 minutes to the hour. We go to Myanmar now, where the detained civilian leader Aung San Suu Kyi has made a second appearance in court via video link. Still not actually quite clear where she's being held after the coup. And she's ended up facing another charge, a third charge, one of causing fear and alarm, to go with the other, what looked like rather not serious charges, to put it that way, that she's been hit with. That's according to her lawyer. Now, it is, of course, her picture that is being held up by demonstrators across the country. Demonstrators who were shot and killed, 18 at least, on Sunday, which made it by far the deadliest day of anti-coup rallies. Now, the deaths are reported across the country, which is quite important. So Yangon in the south, Mandalay to the north, police using live rounds and tear gas. I've been speaking to Phil Robertson. He's the Deputy Asia Director of the rights group Human Rights Watch, and I wanted to know what he'd been hearing from his people on the ground about the spread and particularly the type of violence that's now being meted out by the authorities.
Well, quite clearly, the use of lethal force by the police and military was really outrageous and unacceptable. We heard that there was actions taken really across the country, from southern parts in Dawei to Mandalay in the north and Yangon in the center. Quite clearly, the police have a new rule book, and their rule book is to use lethal force if they decide they need it. And what we're seeing is, of course, unarmed protesters, people who are actually out there simply exercising their civil and political rights, facing a horrible crackdown where people are being shot at distance by police and military.
It's also significant, isn't it, that it's the police that are carrying out this, because in quite a lot of places that we've been hearing from in the past few weeks, the police have not been the sharp end of the security response. It's the army that is feared more. But how significant is it that it's the police that are carrying that? They don't even need the army to do this.
Well, I think you see in many cases right behind the police are the army. And there was a case in Dawei where police were actually handed a automatic weapon by a military official and then sort of instructed to point it down the road to people out of the video site. And that person fired and the police cheered as if he'd hit something. So I think the military are really driving this. They're the ones behind the police. The police and really are a cat's paw for the military.
Escalation of violence, that should lead, I presume, to escalation of response. But what should be forthcoming from the onlooking world?
Well, first of all, on the ground, I mean, obviously, we hope the protesters remain peaceful. We've seen today cat and mouse with the police, with protesters fleeing barrages of tear gas. But the international community really now needs to step up, and it has to go beyond statements and some sanctions against some top-level military leaders to include focus on targeted sanctions against military companies. There are two major conglomerates controlled by the military in Myanmar, the Myanmar Economic Holdings Limited and the Myanmar Economic Corporation. These should be targeted. And companies from overseas that do business with those conglomerates should also be targeted. It's time really now to sort of make sure that there are real consequences for the military to continue down this path of repression.
I mean, obviously, the policy in the bluntest possible way is intended to put people off. That was Sunday, the killings, at least 18 people. This morning, you're hearing that people are still taking to the streets. The demonstrations are carrying on despite this violence.
That's correct. People are still protesting. People are still angry. There hasn't been any real slowdown. I mean, we're not seeing massive numbers like we saw on Saturday and Sunday. But it is certainly the first month anniversary of the coup, so this is significant. And people, I think, are also signaling clearly to the police and military that they're not going to be pushed off the streets by these kind of thuggish tactics.
That's Phil Robertson of Human Rights Watch. You should say that the US has announced, or the State Department, additional actions in coming days against those responsible for the coup in Myanmar.
Newsday BBC World Service. Let's take you to France now, where a verdict is expected today in the trial of the former president, Nicolas Sarkozy. He's accused of corruption and influence peddling for allegedly trying to bribe a magistrate in return for information about an investigation into his party's finances. Mr. Sarkozy, who led the country from 2007 to 2012, denies the charges and has vowed to clear his name. Let's talk to journalist Catherine Guiardi, who is in Paris for us. He was known as the bling-bling president, wasn't he, Catherine? A very long-running investigation, but serious consequences for Mr. Sarkozy, aren't there, if he's found guilty?
Yes, indeed. I mean, the prosecution has called for a 4-year imprisonment in which he could serve 2. And the Financial Prosecutor's Office issued a violent indictment, which is a first for a French president, highlighting what they call the existence of heavy and consistent charges against Mr. Sarkozy, his lawyer, and the judge, comparing their methods to those of seasoned delinquents, they say, or experienced offenders. So indeed, this case is very complicated. It's linked to a long-running investigation into the right-wing politicians suspected of use of secret donation to fund his presidential campaign in 2007, which led him to the presidency, as you said. And this first case he's been tried for we're going to hear today if indeed he was rightly accused of trying to obtain classified information from a judge that he bribed with a plum retirement job in exchange for inside information. In fact, it happened because his presidential diaries were actually seized in another case. He wanted to prevent that these documents were used by the various magistrates who were investigating on him for other cases. So it's been unveiled in what is known in France this case is known as the Paul Bismuth case because the plot was unveiled when the judges in charge of investigating the Gaddafi case, the funding of the presidential election by the former dictator of Libya, when the judges actually discovered that Nicolas Sarkozy and his lawyer were conversing on secret cell phones. And the former president was using, among others, the pseudonym, the alias Paul Bismuth. And this is why this case is known as this.
Thanks for the explanation. I mean, it's just one of several criminal investigations into Mr. Sarkozy, so I know there are others to come after this one. I mean, how damaging is it to his political ambitions, because he still has them? Do the French care about this kind of scandal, this kind of alleged embezzlement?
Well, in fact, I mean, in defending himself, Nicolas Sarkozy said that he had been dragged through the mud for 6 years. What did I do to deserve this, he said at the end of last year when the trial was on. And in fact, some people do believe that. He's quite popular still. He's indeed the first president to appear in the dock, but he's at 66. He remains very popular among the right-wing electorate, and he's close to the present leader, Emmanuel Macron. He advises on different issues. Nicolas Sarkozy has expressed his wish to be back in politics in several TV interviews, but also in a book he published last year. And in one of those interviews, answering the question, what is a good president? He said, a fighter. And what is a bad one? A normal one, he said. And in fact, with 10 cases pending, Nicolas Sarkozy is definitely not a normal political figure in France.
He certainly isn't. Catherine Guiardi, thank you for the update. Joining us from Paris, Nicolas Sarkozy, former French president. He'll find out his fate later today. Let's get all the sports news now. Here's Al.
And the second round of African Champions League games involving South African sides has finally taken place, which ends a fractious period for clubs and associations alike. The games were played against a backdrop of Algeria and Morocco denying visas to visiting teams from South Africa over COVID fears. That was followed by threats from the South African FA to refuse to allow its club sides to play in neutral venues. Well, Kaizer Chiefs might wish they'd have stayed at home. They were thrashed 4-0 by Wydad Casablanca in Ouagadougou. Mamelodi Sundowns were helped by Algerian opponents CR Belouizdad having Chouaib Kadid sent off in the 3rd minute in Dar es Salaam. The Sundowns ran away 5-1 winners. In China, the Super League champions Jiangsu FC have announced they are shutting down effective immediately. The decision affects both the recently crowned men's and the highly decorated women's teams, all amid a backdrop of the Chinese government scaling back its financial commitments to domestic football. BBC Sport's been told by a Suning source there'll be no impact on Inter Milan, who Suning also own. In the Premier League, Manchester United's Ole Gunnar Solskjaer was not happy with the referee after their goalless draw with Chelsea. In particular, a decision over a handball against Callum Hudson-Odoi, which referee Stuart Atwell didn't give. He would also claim later that referees were being swayed by outside influences. United remained second thanks to Leicester's 3-1 home defeat by an impressive-looking Arsenal side. Nicola Pepe capping an impressive performance with a goal there. Spurs beat Burnley by 4-0. Their most notable performance came from Gareth Bale, who scored twice to the delight of boss Jose Mourinho.
It's the best Gareth Bale that we had during the season. More confidence, more better condition, no bad feelings with injuries. Is something that he was not able to do 3 or 4 months ago, and in this moment he's giving us that. So very happy for the team because the team needs him, but very happy for Gareth because he's a Spurs boy and means a lot for him.
It all means Manchester City now lead the table by 12 points. And away from football, Tiger Woods said he was touched to see a large number of golfers at the WGC event in Florida wearing his trademark red top and black trousers. They did so as a mark of respect to the American, who's still recovering from surgery after a serious car crash in California last week. Here is the tournament's winner.
It means everything to me. And, you know, yes, he had the crash and thankfully he's all right and hopefully he has a quick and great recovery. But I don't think we say thank you enough. So I want to say thank you to Tiger because, you know, sometimes you lose people too early. And that's like, you know, Kobe, I lost my grandpa about a month ago. And you don't get to say thank you enough. So thank you guys.
And the big game in the NBA, the LA Lakers asserting their dominance over the Golden State Warriors, winning 117-91.
Al Ross with the sport. Now, the incoming head of the CIA, Bill Burns, says he's going to make a very high priority of microwave attacks on US personnel. The so-called Havana syndrome has affected diplomats and also our next guest, Mark Polymeropoulos, who retired from the CIA after a 26-year career because of a mysterious microwave attack in Moscow. So he's finally been taken seriously at the highest level of the CIA. What did that feel like?
It was a pretty extraordinary moment for me personally. You know, I had finished with my treatment at Walter Reed and I received a diagnosis of traumatic brain injury. So the medical doctors are very clear that something occurred. And then to hear Bill Burns acknowledge this along with really a bipartisan group of senators, I was emotional watching it because, you know, it's been a battle for a long 3 years. And so I think we've really turned a corner in the U.S. government. So I have some hope.
Good. A battle against what? What did you feel that you were up against? Is it that it's a hidden injury, or did you feel that there was also a desire not to point the finger at Moscow?
I felt a lot of intransigence from the senior medical staff who frankly didn't believe me. And so, you know, it turned into, for me, was not only a physical wound, but also a silent wound in which, you know, there was a moral injury. There was that aspect as well where, you know, if you're not believed, it's pretty devastating after working for an organization that even to this day I still deeply believe in. But that was 26 years of service, and it not to be believed after being injured was tough to swallow.
The symptoms are now accepted. Is there agreement about what caused it? What do we know about the background to this?
The National Academy of Sciences, when they published their study about a month or so ago, they concluded it was likely a microwave weapon. And so now was another watershed moment where you had a preeminent group of American scientists make this conclusion. And again, it helped us, as so many of us had battled kind of the bureaucracy of many senior medical officials in the State Department and the CIA just didn't believe this happened. And now we have a group of 19 preeminent scientists saying so. So that was, to us, a really big deal. And for me, it certainly validated what I thought had occurred after what happened to me in Moscow in December of 2017.
The idea is so out of a movie. It's subterfuge. It's science fiction. It's also, I mean, if Russia and China are doing it, does the question ever occur of whether the US might be doing this as well?
That's a fair question, and I will say that, after having served in the senior ranks of the CIA, I can say pretty smartly saying that that's not the case. And really, it's not to say that the U.S. hasn't developed weapons like this. I'm sure that we have, but there's a moral component to this because what the microwave weapon really does is incapacitate, it injures. It's frankly against the laws of armed conflict. So there also is a long history of intelligence reporting, and it's been out in the press now, and much of it has been declassified, that stated the Russians had developed such weapons. And so I don't think it's any surprise that Russia or other countries have this. It's just a question of employing it.
Why is it being used, do you think? Is it useful, or is it actually the terror, the unpleasantness, the sheer nastiness of this that makes it doubly effective?
I think you're exactly right. It is doubly effective. So first and foremost, out of the several dozen officers who've been afflicted by this, they've been taken out of service. And so, frankly, I had to retire. So, I was a very, highly decorated senior officer. And, I was, 47 years old when this happened to me. And so by 50, I had to retire. And so it takes you off the pitch. I was visiting Moscow. I was a senior officer on a delegation dealing with the Russian government. It was, a bit of a nasty trip in terms of the bilateral relationship. And I woke up in the middle of the night to a start with terrible vertigo, my head spinning. I couldn't stand up. I mean, something terrible had happened to me. I've served in Afghanistan and Iraq. I've been shot at plenty of times. I've risked my life numerous times, but nothing like this had ever happened. I mean, it was terrifying, but there was no doubt that something terrible had happened that evening.
And where were you? You were in a hotel? You were in a compound?
I was in a hotel room.
You were in a hotel room.
In a hotel room. And I've had a headache every day for 3 years. It never goes away day and night.
So the CIA are taking it seriously. We've had this statement from the very top as well. What do? Do they sort of say, we think that this weapon, if it exists, is immoral, should not be used? It's a difficult thing to get sort of agreement round the table. The point of weapons is they knock the other side out. This one works. Hurrah, they're going to think, great weapon we've got.
So the number one thing that the U.S. government had to do is treat its injured personnel, and there's a path forward now. The second part is, of course, accountability and determining who is behind this, and then there should be accountability. Look, if it's the Russians, if it's others, it's a violent act that's taken against our officials, and there should be repercussions. And so that's what I would hope to, because at the end of the day, how are they going to get officials to serve in tough places if this is still happening? And so I think it's a national security question.
Mark Polymeropoulos.
Finally, on Newsday today, the road movie Nomadland has won the Best Drama Award at the Golden Globes, while the late actor Chadwick Boseman scooped Best Actor for the period blues drama Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, 6 months after he died of cancer at the age of just 43. But still, the awards ceremony is under fire for having no black judges on the panel. Sophie Long sent us this report.
The 78th Golden Globe Awards drew a very different socially distanced crowd.
We are so grateful for the work that you do and that you're here so that the celebrities can stay safely at home.
Yes, thank you so much.
Nomadland!
Nomadland, the very real story of a woman's journey through grief in the American West, was the big winner of the night, taking Best Picture and Best Director for Chloe Zhao, only the second woman to be bestowed the honour.
The Crown!
The Crown was declared Best Television Series, and many of its cast honoured for making it so.
Thank you so much.
Emma Corrin won for her portrayal of Princess Diana, beating Olivia Colman's Queen Elizabeth, who was nonetheless overjoyed. And Josh O'Connor was crowned Best Actor for his role as Prince Charles.
Hello, everyone. Wow, that's quite a surprise.
There were 2 Golden Globes for Sacha Baron Cohen's second Borat film.
Thank you to the all-white Hollywood Foreign Press.
Best Actress and Actor in Motion Picture Dramas went to people of colour, Andra Day for her role in The United States vs. Billie Holiday, and Chadwick Boseman won posthumously for his role in Ma Rainey's Black Bottom.
Accepting on behalf of Chadwick Boseman is his wife, Simone Ledford Boseman.
You would thank God
He would thank his parents. He would thank his ancestors for their guidance and their sacrifices. He would say something beautiful.
You're doing me dirty. Am I on? Is this on? Is this on? All right, cool. Can you hear me now?
The first two awards of the night went to black British men, Daniel Kaluuya for Judas and the Black Messiah, and John Boyega for Small Axe. And throughout the evening, much was made of the voting body's total lack of any black members. All signs, perhaps, that the Hollywood Foreign Press Association is now at least listening to recent fierce criticism.
And the Golden Globe goes to Rosamund Pike, I Care a Lot.
Rosamund Pike was recognised for her role in the dark comedy thriller I Care a Lot, and Anya Taylor-Joy for The Queen's Gambit. There was a Lifetime Achievement Award for Jane Fonda, who used her speech to celebrate series the Golden Globes chose not to. Celebrities made speeches from sitting rooms, bedrooms and other indeterminate places, wearing anything from ball gowns to pyjamas. But while it may have lacked glitz, we got a glimpse into celebrity homes and some heartwarming family moments.
Sophie Long sent us that report from the Golden Globes, so no black judges on the panel. They are listening. Maybe they could act on that, Lawrence, in time for next year's ceremony. They've got 12 months. That was Newsday. Join us tomorrow.
You're listening to the BBC World Service, and here's what's happening in the studio this week.
Emily Young is Britain's greatest living stone carver. Her monumental works are sought after all around the world. But find out how her statues, that could have sold for hundreds of thousands of pounds, have ended up at the bottom of the sea.
In the studio, Tuesday at 13:30 and 23:30 GMT. And in half an hour, we join Manuela Saragossa for Business Daily.
We're talking about lockdown breakdowns. It's almost a year since the World Health Organization declared the outbreak of COVID a pandemic. Many embraced working from home to start off with, but has it lost its luster? We look at the toll the past year has taken on people's mental health.
This is the BBC World Service, the world's radio station.
Coming up after the news on the BBC.
be able to get their first shot, but many remain reluctant. Healthcare workers in the Ivory Coast city of Abidjan will get COVID vaccinations today. It's the first national rollout of the UN-backed COVAX programme, the global vaccine sharing initiative. Naomi Grimley reports.
COVAX is the biggest vaccine procurement plan in human history. But it's struggled in the international scramble for vaccines and has faced criticism for being too slow to start its rollout. Some countries have looked elsewhere in the interim to boost supplies through bilateral deals. The World Health Organization described the rollout as an important first step towards achieving vaccine equity, but it added it was still only the beginning.
World News from the BBC. The New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern has urged people to inform on COVID restriction rule breakers. Ms Ardern said some people involved in the latest outbreak that pushed the city of Auckland back into lockdown had ignored clear instructions to remain in isolation. Hundreds of protesters have gathered outside a court in Hong Kong where 47 pro-democracy activists are due to face charges of conspiracy to commit subversion. The charges relate to an unofficial primary poll last year that aimed to select opposition candidates for a legislative election. The Hong Kong authorities say the primary was a plan to overthrow the government. France's former president, Nicolas Sarkozy, is due to learn the verdict today in his trial on corruption charges. President from 2007 until 2012, Mr. Sarkozy is accused of offering a judge a plum job in return for inside information on an investigation into his campaign finances. The road movie Nomadland has won the Best Drama Award at the Golden Globes. Chloe Zhao, who made the film, also won Best Director. Here's Sophie Long with the highlights.
Nomadland! Nomadland, the story of a woman's journey through grief in the American West, was one of the big winners of the night. It was voted Best Picture and Chloe Zhao Best Director, only the second woman to win the honour.
The Crown!
The Netflix drama The Crown also scooped several awards. It was declared Best Television Series, and several of its cast were also honoured.
Thank you again to the Hollywood
Sacha Baron
Foreign
Cohen
Press.
took 2 Golden Globes for Borat, subsequent movie film.
Donald Trump is contesting the result. He's claiming that a lot of dead people voted.
Best Actress and Actor in Motion Picture Dramas went to Andra Day for her role in The United States versus Billie Holiday, and Chadwick Boseman won posthumously for his role in Ma Rainey's Black Bottom.
And that's the BBC News.
Welcome to Hard Talk on the BBC World Service with me, Stephen Sacker. My guest today has been in the music business for more than 50 years. Harvey Goldsmith's unique talent involves neither voice nor instrument. His skill is staging events. He is the arch promoter, responsible for massive stadium concerts, supergroup tours, and extraordinary one-off extravaganzas which have captivated the world. Perhaps his most famous gig was the Live Aid concert to raise aid money for the Ethiopian famine in 1985. He has worked with the biggest musical stars from the Rolling Stones and Freddie Mercury to Luciano Pavarotti, and he's still at it. At least he would be if it weren't for the COVID pandemic, which has snuffed out live culture and entertainment across much of the world. Even now, with vaccines offering real hope of an end to the pandemic, it's not clear how and when the live arts scene will get back on its feet. The multi-billion-dollar creative industries are facing an existential crisis, and nowhere more so than in the UK, where Brexit has brought with it new costs and complications. So how resilient will our cultural fabric prove to be? Well, Harvey Goldsmith joins me now. Welcome to Hard Talk. Back in November, you said this, you said, almost 50% of events agencies, such as your own, I guess, do not expect to survive beyond the end of this year. And if it goes to February and beyond, that is where we are now, 75% won't survive if events have not resumed by then. So here we are at that doomsday month you were talking about. I mean, you're still around, you're still trying to keep your business afloat. Do you think you were exaggerating a tiny little bit?
Not really, not at the time, and I'm not exaggerating now. I mean,
where all of us are we're at our wits' end because we can't see a pathway to go forward. It's very hard to get through to government how our industry actually works. I'm very fearful that we would have lost most of the summer with all the outdoor activity, which will affect a huge amount of people, and quite a few of them will actually go out of business because there's only so long you can keep this going.
You're a promoter and a producer, and obviously you need venues to put your gigs, your concerts on in. And I'm just wondering what you're hearing about the viability of some of the venues that you have used in the past and want to use in the future.
Like us in wanting to produce and promote, the venues are desperate to open. And again, they're all hanging on by their bootstraps. So there is a formula, and what we've been pushing government to do is, while we've got this hiatus period until we know when life can restart in some form or other, let's prepare for it. And at the moment, not enough work has been done to allow us to come up with a formula to prepare for it, and that's a bit disappointing.
Why is the government going to listen to Harvey Goldsmith? Because you, not so very long ago, went on the record calling the government's stance on bailing out culture and the arts in the UK as appalling and disgraceful. So maybe you don't have much credit in the bank with the government. They put up more than £1.5 billion to try and rescue culture, and you still said it wasn't enough.
I didn't say it wasn't enough. I said it wasn't going in the right direction, which I don't believe it is. We are not the subsidised arts. We never have been. We've never asked for subsidies before. What we're on is a survival trail. And unfortunately, the Secretary of State is using this as an excuse to say we've taken care of the industry. Well, they haven't. They haven't even started. So there's a long way to go. But going back to those key issues, we want to create a pathway where we can have a bubble, if you like, that is COVID negative. And we want to create the tools to make that pathway. And then we have to cost them out and then figure out how to deal with it. But we haven't got off the base one yet to figure out how to make a safe bubble to allow people to go back to venues in the normal way. Socially distancing just doesn't work, I'm afraid. It doesn't work on an emotional level, and it certainly doesn't work on a financial level.
But Harvey, the government has offered you a bit of a signpost now, because in the last couple of days they've indicated that they think the very rapid testing that is now technologically possible could be used precisely to help music venues, live concerts, theatres as well, to reopen and offer tests to customers as they arrive at the venue. Is that the pathway that your industry can follow?
Without a doubt. But we've been asking for this since November. All we asked the government to do, we weren't saying give us a date. We said let's work towards a target date, work backwards and say what is it we need to do to have a safe, healthy show that could work financially and emotionally. And we couldn't get any engagement. They kept putting it off. We want to prepare. We cannot be told on Tuesday, yes, you can go back to work on Saturday. It's impossible. We need 4 months because we have so much extra work to do.
I'm just wondering to myself, why should the public watching this, both in the UK and around the world, really care? If Madonna or the Rolling Stones or any of the other acts you've worked with in the past, if they can't do their super-duper tours around Europe and the world because of COVID, does that really matter? We don't doubt that they'll still be around to come back when COVID is over, so why are you getting so exercised about this?
Music is embedded in our lives today and is a very important cultural aspect as it has been forever. It isn't just popular music we're talking about. It's all forms of music, from classical music to opera to including the arts as well. That includes theatre and ballet and so on. So we're all in the same boat. And if you extend that out, that also deals with the hospitality industry of all sorts of events, conferences, and Lord knows what else. Our section of the industry alone is £5.8 billion to the country. We are the world leaders in entertainment. We are world leading producers of entertainment. And there is a thirst in the country for people that want to see it. And it shows, interestingly enough, because all of those ticket holders who were offered refunds for shows that were cancelled last year for this year, some of which are now being moved to 22, are still hanging on to their tickets because they want to see their heroes. They want to go. They want to be entertained. It's part of, and it's embedded in our culture.
Well, and let me ask you this, because as I said, I don't think there's much doubt that the big superstars you work with are going to survive this, and they're going to be around when COVID finally isn't affecting your business the way it is now. The real issue is for the up-and-comers, the young people who are musicians, who are young actors, who are trying to make it in the arts and who have found that they have had little or no income over the last 12 months. You're very wired into the culture sector. What are you hearing about what young performers, young creatives are doing? Are they giving up and leaving, or are they hanging on?
Well, of course there are people giving up and leaving because they don't have a choice. There are a lot of singing deliverers from Amazon today. There are all sorts of people that are desperately grabbing whatever work they can get their hands on. There are journeying musicians, members of orchestras, waged musicians from lots of bands, and up-and-coming people who can't just sit around. They're not getting enough subsidised income, let alone any real income, in order to stay afloat. How many of those we've lost, only time will tell. We certainly have some. Of course, the top end of the business will always survive because they can, but it's the middle and the bottom end of the business, the up-and-coming acts who have really have found it so difficult to get through this period. And more particularly, all of the associated people around them, such as the crew, the production managers, the tour managers, etc., who all work with those artists, they have no work whatsoever.
You very passionately said to me a short while ago in this conversation that your business is not about subsidy, it's not about state support, but the industry right now is in such dire straits, some people are saying it's time for the government to give direct financial handouts to artists, creatives and performers so that they can continue to do what they love to do, even in this time of hardship and crisis. Philosophically speaking, do you think that works? You know, just giving government subsidy and support to the arts and artists, is that a route to maintain creativity, or is that really antithetical to what the arts are all about?
Well, it's an interesting point. Most of the people that I've referred to are in terrible strait, and if they can have help, they will gladly take it. However, if you cast your mind back and look at the culture and arts, traditionally, it's always been the survival of the sufferers. They're the ones that get through. They're the ones with a mission. They're the ones that have something to say, and they'll get through by hook or by crook. So parts of it will work without subsidy. I'm only saying that as far as the contemporary music business is concerned, and the way that the business is structured, from the venues to promoters and producers, they have never been subsidised, and they're not looking for subsidy now. They're just looking for survival. The subsidised arts is another animal. What I objected to and what my angst against the government was, and continues to be, and I go way back with arguments with government, they consistently bring on people to regulate and operate in our sphere who have no knowledge of the business. We can build a town in a week.
You're referring there to events like Glastonbury, things like that?
Well, yes, large concerts, large outdoor shows. Yeah. We do that for a living. We move hundreds of people and dozens of trucks on a daily basis across the world. We work all over the world. We know what we're doing. And yet the government haven't reached out to any of the expertise in our business once. They put a committee together to dispense this mythical £1.57 billion of the usual good, great and the useless. And I go back to the Millennium exhibition when I was asked in the last 6 months to take it over and be used as the fall guy, which I said I wouldn't do. They did exactly the same. They do it every single time.
All right, so far we've focused very much on the performers, the creatives, the promoters, the agents, the people like you, all of that raft of people who depend on the creative sector. What we haven't really talked about is the mindset of the public, the customers, the concert goers. You know them, you've known them for 5 decades. Do you think people, when they're allowed to, as you say, it's about getting the rapid testing going, it's rolling out the vaccinations, but when the government tells you and indeed the concert goers that it is safe to go back to these mass audience events, do you think people will really want to?
I think once people feel confident that every effort has been made to create a safe environment, they will come back in their droves. Of course, the very large events, 50,000 capacity upwards, are few and far between. The average events range between the 2,000 to 5,000 mark, and then in the arenas up to 15,000 to 20,000 people. And people will feel comfortable. We know they feel comfortable because there's a lot of research has been done with people, particularly by the ticketing companies, and the results have been actually quite remarkable, that 95% of people polled said, yes, they would go to a concert tomorrow morning if they could. So there's no question about it. It is factored into people's DNA today that is the counterbalance to their daily work, that they can go and be entertained and get emotionally driven into an event and activity.
Even with a mask on, because we're led to believe that some of these rules at mass events might still involve mask wearing. Harvey, can you seriously imagine a rock and roll concert with thousands of people all gathered together and they're all wearing their masks?
Yeah, I think it'll be pretty good, actually. Look, as you know, in the Far East, a lot of the countries in the Far East, people have been wearing masks for probably way back since SARS and before that. People are quite used to wearing masks. They don't object to it. They just do it. For some reason or other in England and in other and parts of Europe, people object to the principle of wearing masks. I'm looking forward to having masks with Bruce Springsteen written on it, or the Rolling Stones, or, you know, Beyonce or whatever, and we could sell great masks for people to wear. Why not? There's nothing wrong with that whatsoever.
Well, you're a man who never misses an opportunity, so that we got that on the record. Why are you and some of the artists you've worked with in the past, including, I'm looking at the names, some of the biggest names in the business like Elton John, Roger Daltrey and others, all up in arms saying the government has disgracefully let musicians down in the way that they've handled the rules on musicians travelling through Europe post-Brexit? The British people voted for Brexit, so what exactly are you complaining about?
It's very simple. In the same way that they have never used the expertise that exists within our community to ask the question, when the Brexit deal was done, which many of us are in favour of, and I, for whatever reason, am a Brexiteer, having spent a year going to Brussels on behalf of our industry and watching the waste and the disgraceful way that the EC runs its business, what the government didn't do is they didn't ask our business what we need. And the two things that we need is, one is passage from country to country, and there is it's called cabotage, which means that if we're driving from one country to the next country, we're only allowed to pick up and drop off twice. And then we have to take our trucks with our equipment in it and return them to England. We don't have a problem with the paperwork because in the rest of the world, we already use carnets, so it'll just be extra pages. But the cabotage issue, which was something to do with preventing Russians dumping or overusing their truck deliveries in Europe, hasn't been sorted out by our government. And the second thing is the visa issue, which is the paperwork of a mountain of extra work which needs to be done, because at the moment we have no visas to work in Europe, there is no reciprocal arrangement.
I
am sure that that will get sorted out, but unfortunately, it hasn't been. It should have been. Our industry is worth 3 times as much as the fishing industry, and they spent 3 years dealing with that. With us, they didn't even look at it.
Right now, is it true to say that musicians are not going to be able to perform in Europe as they used to, and that European musicians are not going to be able to come and perform in the UK as they used to? Is that the reality of where Brexit is impacting the arts business, particularly the music industry, right now?
Yes, that's absolutely correct. It's a very simple issue. We should be excluded from it because it's got nothing to do with the main reason why they created cabotage, and it's an anomaly that just needs to be sorted out, and somebody from the government needs to get to the EC and just get it done.
Last question for you, which is really about the way in which your business is changing, and maybe COVID has just hastened some changes. You were saying long before COVID that actually the era of the festival may be coming to an end. It may have peaked. And you suggested that the music business wasn't generating the huge charismatic stars who could command a vast stadium or a big festival audience in the way that they used to. So maybe something profound is happening. Maybe online streaming is going to replace some of the live experience. Maybe people like you, who in the past made all of your living out of the live event, are going to have to accept that in the 21st century, cultural demands, cultural experience is changing, and maybe changing long after COVID has left us behind.
That's a very good point. There is no question that streaming is now live and on board and works. There is an issue with sound, because listening to a stream concert on a phone, I don't care what phone you've got, is still crap. It's awful. So quality of sound is not good. More importantly, the experience. We're a tribal people. Humans are tribal. They like being together. They like sharing experiences. You cannot beat that ever. But there is no doubt that going forward, streaming will become an integral part of an artist touring program, where they will stream their shows as they go along. Some artists have already been doing it for some time, but it will become much more prevalent. There will be a change. We do have a difference. That's good, because our business is constantly evolving and changing, and so it should. That maybe the very big concerts, the gargantuan festivals and events, if you like the Glastonbury, which is an anomaly, will start to wane, because there aren't those global huge stars that there used to be. It's of a different nature, and so it should be, and it will change. But underneath that, if you look at the expansion of literary festivals, there are now hundreds of them. 10 years ago, I think there were 2. And so the same with music. In a smaller area, 5,000 to 15,000 events of mixed music, of other activities that go together to make a cultural experience. They are developing much faster than they were before, and things are changing. We're in a constantly evolving world.
You've intrigued me with that answer, Harvey. I just want one more to squeeze out of you. Why do you think it is, in your opinion, that the music business isn't throwing up those hugely charismatic megastars like you've referred to in the past, the unbelievable charisma that Freddie Mercury had, or one could maybe say Mick Jagger as well? Why is it, do you think, in your opinion, that these sorts of megastars aren't being produced today?
Partly lethargy. I think partly because the youth today of the more sophisticated countries have got a bit lazy, I think. I'm surprised that more artists haven't come up to fight really hard during the pandemic. I'm really surprised that there aren't better songs being written. And that's the way it is. I think it is a bit of lethargy, but we are changed. There are lots and lots of different forms of music that are coming out today. We're spread very wide. I think, and the final reason actually is to do with technology. Today, you can hear or listen to anything. There's 1,000 different types of music you could pick up literally at a stroke of a button. And what used to be when we built the huge, gigantic acts, the dinosaur acts of today, if you like, is because it was narrowcast, because everybody focused on listening to that album, to buying the album and listening to it, and then listening to the CD, etc. And they focused it because they were given information by a very few areas of the medium. Today, it's so wide, it's so out there that there's no need for those huge acts. But when you look at the streaming figures, there are artists that are streaming in the billions. So therefore, something new is happening and something different is happening. And I'm thrilled about it personally because that's the way it all evolves.
This is the BBC World Service with a brand new series.
What is it that attracts people to one another? With so many dating options online, why is it so hard to match with somebody you're excited about? Does having so many choices actually complicate the search for a companion?
When you give people too much of a good thing, instead of being liberated by it, they get paralyzed. This person's pretty nice, but that other person was funnier, and that other person was better looking.
I'm Dessa, the host of Deeply Human, and I'm tasked with finding out what we all want to know. Why do you do what you do?
I mean, we're trying to win life's greatest prize, which is a mating partner.
Why do you fall for him or her? First up, dating. The thrills, the frustrations, and that one time I went speed dating in the suburbs.
Nobody gets out of love alive.
The socks stay on, and I don't know what you can do to get somebody's socks off.
A BBC World Service and American Public Media co-production with iHeartMedia.
Deeply Human. Sunday at 10 GMT.
This is the BBC World Service. I'm Manuela Zaragoza, and in Business Daily shortly, we're talking about lockdown breakdowns. It's almost a year since the World Health Organization declared the outbreak of COVID-19 a pandemic. Many embraced working from home to start off with, but has it lost its luster? We look at the toll the past year has taken on people's mental health. That's after the news.
BBC News with Jerry Smith. Demonstrators have returned to the streets of Myanmar's biggest city, Yangon, a day after security forces killed 18 protesters. The country's detained leader, Aung San Suu Kyi, has again appeared in court via video link. She's been charged with 2 new offences. Health workers in Ivory Coast will be the first to receive the Oxford AstraZeneca COVID vaccine as part of the international COVAX programme, aimed at immunising poorer countries. Neighbouring Ghana will start its COVAX programme on Tuesday. Its president is urging citizens to get jabbed and reject conspiracy theories. The fiancé of the late Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi has called for Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman to be punished for his murder. Reacting to last week's US intelligence report, Hatice Cengiz said that if the prince escaped sanction, it would be a stain on humanity. Hong Kong police have warned hundreds of protesters gathered outside a court that they're in breach of the controversial national security law. The court is the scene of the trial of 47 pro-democracy activists indicted under the legislation. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says Iran was clearly behind an explosion that damaged an Israeli ship last week in the Gulf of Oman. His recording was publicised hours after Syria said it had destroyed Israeli missiles. Chadwick Boseman has posthumously won the Golden Globe Award for Best Actor 6 months after his death. He took the prize for his performance in the period blues drama Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. The Best Director award went to Chloe Zhao, whose film Nomadland also won for Best Picture Drama. And medical researchers in Britain say they've found that a particular type of ultrasound scanner is especially good at detecting cancerous tissue in brain tumours. BBC News.
Hello, welcome to Business Daily from the BBC with me, Manuela Zaragoza. Coming up, lockdown breakdowns. The CEO who quit his job after a mental health crisis precipitated by the COVID pandemic.
It was a matter of sort of days of going from being pretty good to being in
a really dangerous place where I could have done something to harm myself.
It's almost a year since the World Health Organization declared the outbreak of COVID-19 a pandemic. And all this week, Business Daily is looking at its impact on mental health, particularly in the workplace.
You know, people feel very invisible at the moment because they are literally unseen. And making people feel you're in their minds, you remember them as individuals, is a tremendous boost.
That's all here on Business Daily from the BBC.
Yeah, it can be difficult to parse out in terms of what leads me to feel better or worse on any given day. However, I think some of the factors in the pandemic that really impacted me personally, everything being online, so I think really made me feel more cut off and I think more alone.
Matthew Cooper there is the co-founder of a startup called EarnUp, a San Francisco-based financial technology platform that helps people automate their loan payments. In December, after a mental health breakdown in the summer, Matthew stepped down as the company's CEO.
Last year, I had an episode where I ended up hospitalized initially and then in sort of an inpatient treatment facility after just like a really scary descent of my kind of mental health. And coming out of that, I decided that I really just wanted to take a step back from things that were stressors. And one of those was, being the CEO of a company in order to focus more on kind of mental health and stability.
Now, Matthew struggled with anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation and post-traumatic stress disorder ever since he was a teenager. But the pandemic brought things to a head.
My daily life sort of changed quite a bit in that the routines of getting up, getting on the train, listening to podcasts, going to work, socializing, doing work, leaving. I would say some of those routines all changed, where it was just kind of set up a little home office in a corner of my apartment. Was on Zoom there or was kind of on my own. I had a few people that I would do socially distanced things with, but outside of work, there wasn't a huge amount going on, in that period of the pandemic. As part of kind of managing my mental health, the last probably 3 years, I've had pretty strict boundaries around when I work and when I don't work. And when I'm not working, I'm like really offline. So it wasn't so much kind of time creep for me, although I've heard that from other people, and more just the digital, more sterile nature of all work engagement. And I would say the other factor was just a massive increase in stress. The business that we were in was hit very hard by the pandemic in certain ways. The employees in the company, which I as the CEO, along with my co-founder, were trying to help manage through this. And then we had this Black Lives Matter, super important and also just like highly charged phase last year, which we as a diverse company and a mission-driven company really tried our best to kind of lean into. Work definitely was significantly more stressful for everyone.
Do you think your breakdown would have happened had there not been a pandemic?
So I don't believe I would have had the kind of collapse mental health-wise that I did. It was a matter of sort of days of going from being pretty good to being in a really dangerous place where I could have done something to harm myself. And I generally have had weeks or months where I kind of see that progression happening when I've gone through those phases in the past. So I do think that the nature of the pandemic it definitely created an environment where I could have a very different and much scarier type of mental health breakdown.
We'll come back to Matthew a little later, but Matthew wasn't alone with his struggles. The COVID-19 pandemic has drastically changed the way that millions of people everywhere work, blurring the boundaries between home and work life. More than half of all Americans now say the COVID pandemic has hit their mental health. That's according to a YouGov survey carried out in 14 countries and regions around the world. The survey also showed that almost 2/3 of British people said they'd found themselves more troubled over the course of the outbreak, with people in Hong Kong and Italy following closely behind. It's all the more remarkable because when lockdowns were first put in place and people were encouraged to work from home, the picture was quite different.
Initially, people loved the fact that they weren't having to do their commute. It turns out people generally don't like to spend 2 hours a day getting to and from work. And what that triggered was an increase in productivity.
Margaret Hefferman is Professor of Management at the University of Bath in the UK. She's also run 5 businesses and written several books about management.
One of the things that's been very interesting in lockdown is to see that, first of all, that it works, in the sense that, for years we've been able to do this and companies have resisted it, thinking it would lead to people slacking off. What we've discovered is, in fact, quite the opposite. And so now what's happened is productivity may be up, but it's really only because people are working longer and longer hours. We've been studying productivity since 1888. Human productivity taps out at about 40 hours a week. After that, your brain gets tired. It starts to make mistakes. And then you're using the extra hours that you put in largely to clear up the messes you've made because your brain wasn't in great shape. So you can work people longer than 40 hours a week, obviously. And you can do that okay for, in a crunch mode to hit a deadline or a shipping date or something like that. But if you do it long term, what you find is people start to get depressed. They start to retreat in an effort to protect what energy they have left. They start to distance and disassociate from their family members, their loved ones, and they start to feel very isolated. And that, of course, can also start to impact their ability or willingness to communicate well. What worries me very much about what we're seeing in remote working is that the productivity gains are now not cost-free in terms of how people relate to each other, and really significantly in terms of how they feel about their work. Without the reward of social interaction, the work starts to feel quite meaningless. It just comes in, I do it, it goes out. It comes in, I do it, it goes out. I think what most workplaces have underappreciated, and I've been writing about this for years, it's not a pure pandemic consequence, is that much of the reward in work derives from our social relationship, from the kind of unspoken feedback we get, when people are obviously glad to see us, or obviously amused by a joke we made, or obviously delighted by the work that we've done. Much of this goes unspoken, but it doesn't go unfelt.
What are we talking about when we talk about mental health in the workplace? Because there is this confusion, I think, in the public discourse around mental health, whether we're speaking about emotional well-being or proper mental health issues like major depression, like psychosis. When we talk about mental health in the workplace, what do we mean?
What we're talking about is how the workplace either contributes to or undermines our capacity to work effectively. For example, if you work people very, very long hours, day after day, week after week, month after month, they do gradually lose their capacity to work effectively. And you may also trigger both physical and mental symptoms of stress. So there's a great deal in the way that we work that can either enhance people's well-being, physical and mental health, or it can undermine people's physical and mental health. And I think that one of the things that most managers and indeed workers forget is that thinking is a physical activity, and to the degree that we're made to work in ways that are physically unhealthy, we will start to suffer cognitive loss, which can have all kinds of knock-on effects.
And when you talk about cognitive loss, what do you mean?
We know that lots of multitasking will mean that because you never quite finish a task before you start the next one, you gradually lose your capacity to remember the information that you've been handling. Now, that may then, of course, make you start to feel incompetent, like you're slightly out of control, like the work is overwhelming, and a sense of hopelessness or helplessness.
Margaret Heffernan, more from her later. Not everyone has found working from home in lockdown difficult, though.
I'm an introvert by nature, so it's not difficult working on my own. I get my energy from myself.
Mark Simmons is the author of the memoir Breakdown and Repair, a father's tale of stress and success. His own mental health issues led him to completely reevaluate his career and working practices.
Back in the day when I was in my late 30s, I found myself in a difficult situation where I was in the wrong job. I set up business with 2 other people as a kind of an entrepreneur in inverted commas, and I'd simply struggled. The stress built up and built up and built up, and then just one fine day, I was looking at my computer as I am now, and suddenly everything froze. And froze as in I couldn't do anything, and I simply froze. And I was having a breakdown. A breakdown is literally when your brain is telling you that enough is enough. It's the brain saying, I'm not going to allow you to go on any further because you're basically abusing me.
Mark's breakdown led him to a pretty dark place. He made an attempt on his own life.
But when all this happens, and fortunately it's kind of, I survived to tell this tale, is you sort of sit back and you think, come on, this must be a different way to go here. So at that point, I started asking myself the questions like, right job for me, right working environment, am I a corporate person, am I a home person? The most important thing is to be, in the right kind of employment where your character is matching up with the needs of the job itself. So if you get those two things in place, then I think that stress automatically reduces. But then when you think about dealing with stress on a day-to-day basis, I once had this excellent, wonderful counsellor who gave me this very clear analogy. He said, what's really important is that you get your banisters in place. She said that the staircase in life would always be rickety. You can't prevent things from happening. But what you can do is you can manage how you kind of respond to these things here. So have you got in place a daily routine of exercising, of sleeping well, of eating properly, of socialising enough for you, be it an introvert or an extrovert? Have you got things in place that are going to basically help you get through the day?
Some good tips there on helping yourself. But what about employers? What are their responsibilities towards employees during these difficult times? Back to Margaret.
When you ask people to work, you take on some kind of contract to keep them safe. Now, obviously, we have quite a lot of, health and safety legislation that's specifically around physical health and safety. But I think as more and more of our work has moved to knowledge working, that contract has kind of expanded. And there's a sense that actually it's both in the employer's best interest, but it's also a sense of responsibility that the way in which we work should support physical and mental health and not undermine it. And I think what's difficult about this is that there is still huge amounts of stigma around mental ill health. And I think quite appropriately a sense of privacy. And so it's an area of working together in which very few people have a great deal of experience or skill, in the sense that it's definitely not part of most managers' training.
What we've also seen is many big companies put in box-ticking exercises, and it's the kind of thing where they offer things like yoga at lunchtime or an online virtual sort of training session. Is that enough?
I mean, you've seen a whole bunch of these things. There are things called pulse surveys where everybody gets sent, these little questionnaires once a week or once a month. And from that, managers are supposed to deduce the kind of mental state of their workforce. Automating this stuff may make people feel that they're delivering on their responsibility. I think it's a sham, frankly.
You can't depersonalize this kind of compassion. It has to be personal. The managers has to engage with their employee.
Yeah, you can't depersonalize being personal. It's not just that it doesn't work. It's almost worse than nothing because it makes people feel insignificant. I'm thinking of a leader in the NHS whom I mentored during the first phase of the pandemic, who, as things started to subside, thought about all the people who report to her, found out the names and ages of their children, and wrote letters to their children to say, thank you so much for letting mum or dad work as hard as they did through this period.
It sounds exceptional. And I can imagine lots of employers listening saying, yeah, but did it make a difference? Where are the statistics showing that this helps in terms of mental health, it helps in terms of productivity?
The tendency, because of our obsession with data and our belief that if you can't measure it, it doesn't matter, risks actually de-skilling a whole generation of managers who can study a survey with great statistical clarity, but actually do not know anymore how to have a conversation with one of their colleagues. People feel very invisible at the moment because they are literally unseen. And making people feel you're in their minds, you remember them as individuals, is a tremendous boost to motivation and commitment to work. And I have not seen a single piece of software anywhere ever that has the same consequence.
Professor Margaret Heffernan. Well, with many of these mental health issues coming to a head now in workplaces everywhere amid the pandemic, I had a few more questions for the former EarnUp CEO, Matthew Cooper, who we heard from earlier. Do you think the pandemic will change the way people talk and think and act on mental health?
It's very different now. I do believe there is a shift that I hope is a permanent shift of sort of caring more about people, and not in an invasive way, but just in an open-hearted way to make it a more normal part of a discussion to say, how are you doing? How is life? And what are all the pieces of your life in a place that are allowing you to show up for your work today?
I'm presuming you're in a good place at the moment.
Yeah, I'm in a very good place. I'm advising on the EarnUp side each week to support them where they want help. I've also just been getting a lot of additional sort of care and support.
I just wonder if at some level, whether there is some regret that, your mental health has taken its toll, you've paid the price in terms of you've had to give up your job as CEO.
Yeah, I don't know about in terms of what the future will hold professionally. I also don't feel like a great sense of loss. I think our culture is obsessed with things staying the same. I had an amazing 7 years leading an organization and hopefully building something that is valuable and is doing great work. It was clear that, based on this episode, that wasn't the role for me to stay in. In the future, I don't know. I mean, I loved starting an organization and building it, but not in a rush today to figure that out.
And we wish him all the best. That was the former CEO of EarnUp, Matthew Cooper, ending this edition of Business Daily. Remember, if any of the issues in today's edition affect you, experts agree that it's important to talk to someone and get support. Do seek the help of a professional mental health body, if not a doctor or friends and family. Today's producer was Sarah Trina. A lot more on mental health coming up on Business Daily throughout this week. Tomorrow, the future workforce, how lockdowns and the pandemic have affected young people. Join us again then.
Now on the BBC World Service, Witness History with me, Rebecca Kesby. And today we go on an adventure to the very deepest, darkest place on planet Earth, 11 kilometres down to the bottom of the Pacific Ocean in the Mariana Trench. I've been speaking to Don Walsh. He was on the two-man crew that first went to the very bottom of the sea in 1960 in a specially designed sub called the Trieste.
Released by the U.S. Navy come these first films of the bathyscaphe Trieste, rolling in heavy seas after the deepest dive ever made by man. Jacques Picard and Lieutenant Walsh went down 7 miles into the Marianas Trench, greatest known depth in the world.
It's hard to overestimate what an engineering triumph it was for Don Walsh and Jacques Picard to get to the very bottom of the deepest oceanic trench and back up again alive in January 1960. It wasn't just the first manned mission, it was the first ever mission. No one and nothing had been sent that far down before, and no one knew for sure if their equipment could take it.
My understanding is that you're looking at about £16,000 per square inch of pressure.
8 tons.
8 tons.
So the total pressure on the cabin, I think we figured, was 200,000 tons.
What would happen to a human being if they were exposed to that pressure?
Oh, you'd be just red mush instantly. You wouldn't even know you're dead. It happened so quickly. That was the big thing. I mean, if something had collapsed, we wouldn't even known it.
And did that play on your mind at all?
Not at all. No, there's no room for fear because fear takes over. People paralyze. Thing is, as an engineer, I pretty much knew the numbers, how thick the hull was, how I'd been tested, how I'd been designed. So you just got to know your kit and you got to know your trade, namely deep ocean engineering.
Don Walsh was a lieutenant in the US Navy in the late 50s. He was a submariner, specialising in marine engineering. Jacques Picard was a Swiss research engineer who, together with his father, designed and began building an experimental submersible capable of reaching new depths, a bathyscaphe. They approached the US Navy for financial and practical help, and the partnership was formed. Experimental engineering with a view to enhance scientific knowledge of the ocean bed.
Jacques Picard and I were test pilots, like with a new airplane. Our job was to take it, modify it, finding out what it could do, make it reliable, make it safe, and then prove it to the world. The whole idea being, if it can go to the very deepest place in the ocean, it has to be safe at any other depth for a scientist that can take them to where they can get the kind of observations they want.
It's thought Italian polymath and artist Leonardo da Vinci first came up with the idea of a submarine in the 1500s, but it wasn't really until the 20th century that the technology took off, notably during the battle for the Atlantic in the Second World War. But the collapse depth of, say, a German U-boat was about 200 to 250 metres. Any deeper than that and the hull could be crushed under the water pressure. What the small team building the Trieste bathyscaphe were trying to do was to send a vessel 10,000 metres down. It was totally new technology.
Everything we did, we wrote the book. Everything we needed in pieces of kit, instruments, things like that, we had to design and make. Things that we couldn't buy or people wouldn't give us, we'd steal. If you've ever known any submariners, that's the way we operate. You can tell us what we can't do, and then we nod and agree, and then go off and do it. Just doing the impossible takes a little longer.
You didn't have a map. You didn't know what it was going to look like down there. That's quite a foreign idea for a lot of people in the world today, to go first as a human where you haven't even sent machinery before.
Remember, though, at our time, we didn't have all these miniaturized circuits, transistors, none of that. And so we couldn't automate anything, but you could automate a human. It's called education. The cheapest thing to put inside the submersible that could function well is a human being. That's why we had people in it, to take care of things that were not programmed or not expected.
The Trieste departed San Diego in early October 1959. It was towed out to Guam in the Western Pacific. From there, the team began a series of test dives in the Mariana Trench, which is formed by the collision of two vast tectonic plates. Each test dive would go further than the last, until on January the 23rd, 1960, the crew attempted to reach Challenger Deep, the lowest point of the trench, 11 kilometres under the sea. Unlike the moon landings later that decade, virtually no one was watching this technological breakthrough, or even knew it was happening.
No one knew we were on Guam. We dragged the submersible out. One moment it's on the surface. Next moment there's just a cloud of bubbles. There's no noise, no bands, nothing.
It took you a few hours to get to the bottom, didn't it? As you're going down, what's going through your mind?
It's pretty intense. You're very busy. You're focused on the job. Going down slowly because, again, we had no idea what the seafloor looked like. You're alert to everything. What was that? That noise? Oh, yeah, I know what that is. That kind of thing. The routine was the same as all our other dives. It was just a longer routine. By the time we got all of our kit in there, there wasn't a whole lot of space for the two-person crew. The space for us was about the same as inside the largest household refrigerator, and the temperature wasn't much different.
When you got to the bottom, were you aware that it was the bottom? How did that feel?
We're aware at the bottom because we stopped. We couldn't go any further. We ran out of water. Yeah, well, we're looking at our depth gauge, and it seemed to indicate about what the scientists had estimated the depth would be at Challenger Deep. Jacques and I shook hands. I was very proud of my team. I'm a very junior naval officer. I'm just a lieutenant at the time. And that our little team had pulled this off, just what we promised, we did it. That was the big moment of immense pride that we had achieved this.
You had windows in this craft. What did you see down there?
Yeah, we had a single viewport made of acrylic plastic, was 7 inches thick, as a pressure boundary, of course. The inner opening inside the cabin was only big enough for one eyeball or one camera lens. They're pretty primitive. When we landed on the bottom, we stirred up a lot of bottom sediment. That happened on all our dives, totally expected. And pretty soon, the current would carry that cloud off. Well, this time, the bottom sediment was so fine that it remained in suspension for the whole 20 minutes we were on the seafloor. We could see nothing.
The successful dive won Don Walsh and Jacques Picard many awards and honours, but it would be more than 50 years before anyone ever made a dive to the bottom of Challenger Deep again. So why so long?
If you can get to 20,000 feet, you can look at 98% of the seafloor. Only 2% is deeper between 20,000 and 36,000 feet. So paying for the development of new technology, new equipment, you only have to pay for half the full depth of the ocean, much easier from an engineering and cost point of view, and you get a 98% return. That's good business. However, a scientist will tell you that last 2%, we call the hadal depths, those are all the trenches. And that's where being able to understand plate tectonics, how the basic mechanics of our planet works, you have to be able to understand these deep trenches. Explorers have this drive to be able to do something unique as a scientist. If I could just get a little further out into space, maybe that'll help me understand the cosmos. You get driven by that, and quite ordinary people do extraordinary things.
Don Walsh, now in his late 80s, is still involved in cutting-edge oceanic research. In the past few years, more evidence has emerged of the vital importance the deep ocean has on the health of our entire planet, including as a carbon sink absorbing CO2 emissions.
I've seen over that 70 years the changes in the climate of our planet, first in the polar regions, and I've seen that with my own eyes. It comes down to one short phrase: ocean awareness. People don't understand how everything on our planet depends on the oceans, the health of the oceans. And if you don't understand something, how can you preserve it? From the first time I ever went to sea, I just loved it. It's my sacred place. I mean, after all, our blood in our bodies has about the same salinity as seawater. We are creatures of the sea. We all crawled ashore at some time in the past. It's just that the marine mammals didn't quite make it that far. They just didn't make it across the beach like we did.
Pioneering oceanographer and explorer Don Walsh. He was speaking to me, Rebecca Kesby, for Witness History.
This is the BBC World Service, where we're always asking questions.
Why does...
Will I ever know?
Why can't I...
What actually happens to us?
What do you think it is that...
Crowd Science takes your questions from all over the world and turns them into answers. In the next Crowd Science...
I'd like to find out why men rule the world.
Can science explain why only 1 in 10 countries have a female head of state?
Crowd Science, today at 11:30 GMT. And in 60 minutes, the Cultural Front Line with Nawal Al-Mukafi.
Authors from Lahore and Karachi discuss the challenges of publishing new fiction from Pakistan, and multi-award-winning author Amitav Ghosh on why he's turned to folklore and verse to convey an environmental message.
This is the BBC World Service, the world's radio station.
This is the BBC World Service. Coming up is the climate question.
Today, habits and home truths.
To avoid the worst effects of climate change, we need to drastically change our habits. But habits die hard.
It's because we do them almost unconsciously. We're often not aware that we're doing it.
And the habits that matter most include what we eat and how we power our homes. But scientists are trying to help us break them.
It is early days, they are urgent days, and they are also, it's important to recognize, exciting days, because we have an opportunity to do something. We have an opportunity to make a difference. This is not doom and gloom, this is the time to act.
So our climate question is, how can we be nudged or even shoved to change?
Answers after the news.
BBC News. Hello, this is Jerry Smith. Protesters are back on the streets of Yangon, Myanmar's largest city, a day after 18 were killed by the security forces. The demonstrators remain defiant in their opposition to last month's military coup. The detained civilian leader, Aung San Suu Kyi, has appeared in court via video link in the capital Naypyidaw. Jonathan Head looks at the charges she's facing.
They could add to the length of any prison sentence they want to give her. We understood that she was facing up to 6 years on the existing charges. They're patently absurd. This is a woman who was de facto head of state until the coup overthrew her, and at the time they overthrew her, they claimed to find these walkie-talkie radios used by her security staff, as any senior official would have had, in her house, that they're blaming her for being unregistered. It's a device, basically, to justify keeping her detained. Everyone understands that. It's interesting they haven't attempted yet to apply any more serious charges.
Health workers in Ivory Coast will be the first to receive doses of the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine as part of the international COVAX scheme targeting some of the world's poorest countries. Neighbouring Ghana is due to start its COVAX vaccination programme on Tuesday. Naomi Grimley reports.
COVAX is the biggest vaccine procurement plan in human history. But it's struggled in the international scramble for vaccines and has faced criticism for being too slow to start its rollout. Some countries have looked elsewhere in the interim to boost supplies through bilateral deals. The World Health Organization described the rollout as an important first step towards achieving vaccine equity, but it added it was still only the beginning.
The New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern has urged people to inform on COVID rule breakers. Ms Ardern said some people involved in the latest outbreak that's pushed the city of Auckland back into lockdown had ignored clear instructions to remain in isolation and not disclose their movements. She said this should not be allowed to happen again.
I'm asking everyone, now more than ever, to continue to back and support one another. And if that means calling a family member or work colleague out for not following the rules, then we should do that. Do it with kindness, but do it.
There's significant anger that one family's actions has put Auckland's 1.7 million people into a one-week lockdown. The fiancé of the late Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi has called for Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman to be punished for his murder. In her first reaction since the publication last week of a US intelligence report, Hatice Cengiz said on Twitter that if Prince Mohammed escapes sanction, it would be a stain on humanity. There's been criticism of the Biden administration for not taking more action. BBC News. Police in Hong Kong have told hundreds of protesters gathered outside a court that they're in breach of the controversial national security law. Among the crowd were diplomats seeking to witness the trial of 47 pro-democracy activists who've been charged under the law imposed by Beijing last year. Those in court today had taken part in an unofficial primary poll to select opposition candidates for a legislative election. The US envoy to Afghanistan, Zalmay Khalilzad, has held talks with the senior Afghan leader to try to accelerate the peace process. Afghan officials said Mr. Khalilzad met Abdullah, the head of the High Council for National Reconciliation, to review the US-Taliban deal and the need to reduce violence. Peace talks between the Afghan government and the Taliban in Doha have stalled, while the Biden administration assesses former President Trump's commitment to pull US troops out of Afghanistan. The former French President Nicolas Sarkozy is due to learn the verdict today in his trial on corruption charges. Mr. Sarkozy is accused of offering a judge a plum job in return for inside information on an investigation into his campaign finances. He denies the charges. Mr. Sarkozy faces a number of other investigations. The road movie Nomadland, about marginalised Americans living in vans, has won the Best Drama award at the Golden Globes. Chloe Zhao, who made the film, also won Best Director. The late actor Chadwick Boseman scooped Best Actor for the period blues drama Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, 6 months after he died of cancer at the age of 43. His widow, Simone, accepted the award on his behalf.
He would thank God. He would thank his parents. He would thank his ancestors for their guidance and their sacrifices.
And those are the latest stories from BBC News.
Are you going to shampoo?
Not today. I'm a bit self-conscious, frankly, showering with a colleague. We're breaking new ground here on the climate question.
So, Neil, do you want to explain why we're doing this?
Well, to be clear, we are in separate showers. I'm in Canada, Greya is in England. And we're here, though, because this is where the battle for climate change is going to be won or lost. It's here at home, in our most intimate spaces, where the future of the world will be decided.
Yeah, about 2/3 of global emissions are linked to our homes. And so to avoid the worst effects of climate change, we need to be making some changes from what we put in the fridge to where we set the thermostat.
To how long we stand here in the shower.
These habits are all contributing to climate change.
But habits are hard to break.
So our climate question is, how can we be nudged or even shoved to change? I'm Greer Jackson.
And I'm Neil Rizal. This is The Climate Question from the BBC World Service.
What's your worst habit? Mine is biting the side of my fingernails. I rip them to shreds. Every single time I feel a straggler, I just can't help myself but give it a quick nip. So I wondered, what's yours?
I rub my hands when I'm stressed. I drive my fingers into my palms and rub off the skin. And I can do this until it hurts. And I'm often even unaware that I'm doing it until my wife shouts from across the room, "Stop!"
Oh, Neil, it sounds painful. What I find kind of perplexing and interesting about this is why we continue to do it even though we know it's bad for us.
Some of our behaviours are deeply ingrained and habitual, and those are the most difficult behaviours to shift. It's because we do them almost unconsciously. We're often not aware that we're doing it.
Liz Costa is a senior director at the Behavioural Insights team. This began as a small unit inside the UK government 10 years ago. It had so much success shifting habits in Britain that today it's an independent company that advises governments around the world.
And its success comes down to understanding how our brains work.
So essentially, we have two systems of thinking. System one, which is fast, that's the system that we use when you say, what's 2 times 2, or when you think about how to get to work, a commute that you do by routine and automatically. And then we have system 2, which is our slower system. And that's the more deliberative system that you would use if you were calculating 7 times 18 or going somewhere you'd never been before. And really, that fast system, it's actually a triumph of human evolution, and it helps us navigate an incredibly complicated world and make many, many decisions every day. But it also leaves us prone to some systematic biases and errors in our decision-making. We sometimes don't act in line with our intentions, and we sometimes don't choose the path that might be best for us.
So if we're acting on sort of autopilot, it sounds like you're describing, for a lot of these decisions that we're making day to day, how can we change that? How can we influence those behaviours, particularly when we're talking about climate change?
The lessons that we've learned over the years are that these environmental behaviours that are quite private, deeply habitual, tend to be the ones that are harder to shift.
Harder, but not impossible. Policymakers are increasingly turning to behavioural science for answers, including a technique you might have heard of called nudge.
A nudge is a type of behavioural intervention that makes a particular behaviour or choice more likely. And a key element of a nudge is that it's choice preserving. So people still have the agency and the freedom to choose differently. A classic example is changing the layout of a supermarket so that healthier options are at the checkout or at eye level. It makes us much more likely to pick up an apple, but it doesn't stop us reaching for a chocolate bar instead.
Today, they're being used more and more to solve public policy problems from crime to COVID to climate change by getting us to make better choices. A concrete example might be helpful here. And good news to anyone listening in the middle of winter, we found an example in Cape Town on South Africa's southwest coast. It's a beautiful city of more than 4 million people, and they changed their behaviors to avoid disaster.
My name is Mo Ali. I do lots of work for the BBC World Service, as well as writing for a few magazines in Cape Town.
Where exactly are you today?
I am in an area called Newlands, and as I look to my left, I can see the sun gently going behind Devil's Peak, which is part of Table Mountain. A few leaves in the trees rustling as a slight breeze cooling things down towards the end part of our summer. And as you may be able to hear in the background, you can hear water running from taps. I'm at a spring where people are allowed to come and collect water. As I count, I can actually tell you I don't even need to take my socks off to tell you that there's less than 10 people here. But certainly nowhere near as full as it would have been 3 years ago when we were on the cusp of what was called Day Zero. It's called
Day Zero? What was that?
For 2 years before 2018, we had very low rainfall, and it was the day that was projected that the taps would run dry. And that was a day that was everybody was dreading in Cape Town, because can you imagine going to the bathroom wanting to brush your teeth or wanting to have a shower and opening your taps and no water coming out?
Cape Town's taps will run dry in less than 90 days.
Cape Town on the cusp of becoming the first city in the world to run out of water. Dam levels continuing to drop in the
Western Cape Premier Helen Ziller today met with the National Disaster Management.
There was a real sense of anxiety here as people count down to Day Zero.
This will be the disaster above all disasters.
Presumably the spring you're at became really important for lots of people in providing them with water.
Well, for years people have been using the spring anyway, but obviously with the imminent threat of Day Zero, it became an important alternative source of water supply. I mean, there were huge, long queues. You know, people were literally fighting over water as well.
Something had to be done. Officials introduced restrictions, tariffs, and even reduced the water pressure. They also turned to Professor Martine Visser to create a series of nudges. She's a behavioural economist at the University of Cape Town.
I visited her at her home in an area called Constantia, and we sat in a lovely big garden with a pond next to it and lovely running water going into that pond as well. Very, very serene setting.
My background is in behavioral economics and environmental economics, so I really specialize in that area where we look at how people make decisions about the environment and climate change.
So obviously it was in summertime, no rain. Despite people using less water, we were still careering towards Day Zero. What nudges did the city then use to get people to use even less water?
As the droughts escalated, we approached the city saying that we thought it would be really useful to work together with them to design a visual interactive map, almost like Google Maps, where people could zoom in on the city of Cape Town, they could zoom into their neighborhood, into their household, and they could see with a marked green dot whether their household was compliant or not with the city's regulation. There were some neighborhoods that were very happy and that they worked in WhatsApp groups together and they used this as a way to get everybody to cooperate. But then, some citizens felt like it infringed on their privacy, etc. So it's interesting in terms of the ethical boundaries to which one can implement these carrot or stick motivations in disaster periods like that. The city at that time did feel like the situation warranted that sort of drastic intervention and that it was allowed.
The science behind the map is interesting. It helped create what researchers call a new social norm, which is a fancy way of saying a new standard of acceptable behavior. The campaign also tapped into our competitive nature by awarding prizes to schools that cut consumption the most. But by a wide margin, the top nudge, as judged by the climate question team with a strong bias toward fun audio, was a 2-minute shower song, which tried to cut water consumption by turning washing into a game.
In the shower, it's the last hour. Turn the flow down, need to slow down. Save the water, shower shorter. Can't do without, will cause a drought.
So I'm out the shower. How did you do, Neil?
I absolutely nailed it. I've got short hair and I didn't shampoo, so against the clock, I can be very quick.
Oh, you fared much better than me. I only got as far as rinsing shampoo, nowhere near conditioning. And I don't know about you, but it felt really competitive. It wasn't very relaxing. It was actually pretty stressful.
Yeah, well, while I say I can be quick, I do love a long, hot shower. It is perhaps a terrible habit.
Well, thankfully, Cape Townians are better than us with showers and with water saving more generally. Let's go back to Mo and Martine again.
what we saw was that Cape Town dropped its consumption of water by more than 50% over less than 2-year period, which is phenomenal. And it's so encouraging in terms of the overall message that we can make a difference as a community, as a society, if we really need to and if we really put our minds to it.
How can we apply what we've learned from the Day Zero campaign to the wider issue of climate change and getting people to reduce their emissions?
So I think that climate change is more of what they call a wicked problem, and it's all around that issue of the time frames that we're facing in dealing with a disaster. We had this almost like 2-year window, and the shift was gradual, and most of the change came almost at the end where people really cognized the extent of the threat. With climate change, the problem is that the window is sufficiently large, the time frame is sufficiently long, that people don't make the behavioral change until the point that it's too late.
Martine's not the only one who's been thinking about this particular problem. Eric Tulien works for RARE, a US not-for-profit that uses behavioural insights solely for the benefit of the planet.
People discount the future in really disproportionate ways, where they value what they're getting right now in both positive and negative ways way more than what they value in the future. And that leads people to do things like not caring about the future of the planet or not saving enough money for retirement.
So our short-term needs clash over our long-term needs, and we always choose the short-term.
That's right.
But I mean, as mortals, isn't it more rational to focus on the present? I mean, you never know how long you're going to get on this planet. I mean, why not just kind of focus on today?
Well, you're right that you've identified a reason that people might discount the future. But what we find is they discount the future to a just massive degree. So, for example, you might think that, yeah, we don't know what the future is going to be, so I might not, want to save money at a 1% interest rate. But if I don't have any money for retirement, the fact that I had, a slightly nicer car now really hurts me for the later 30 years of my life.
You'll be living in that car.
That's right.
So behaviours that affect the climate may be harder to tap into, but not impossible. There are 3 main ways in which we could drastically reduce our carbon footprint: energy, transport, and food.
So a core behavior that we need to shift is just not necessarily that everyone goes vegan, but that everybody reduces the amount of meat that they're consuming, particularly the amount of cattle.
Livestock production generates almost 15% of total greenhouse gas emissions, or GHGs as they're known. There are ways to bring down that number by changing the way the animals are raised, but the most direct way is to simply eat less meat. And Eric says behavioral science can help.
So 2 behavior change mechanisms that we can employ here are really highlighting the fact of what psychologists call the dynamic norm of reducing meat consumption. This is showing people that other people are trying to reduce their meat consumption around them. And second, giving people the right information to understand what the climate impact of their food is. Regulators could tell meat producers that they need to label their products to actually say what the GHG emissions associated with them are. And that would give consumers the information that they need to actually make that informed decision. And in fact, studies back up exactly that. When you tell consumers about the GHG emissions of their food, they choose food with lower GHG emissions.
That's food then, but what about powering our homes? Liz says one of the most effective campaigns was run by a company called O-Power, which helps utilities tailor their bills.
What O-Power did was add a very simple message onto people's energy bills that was designed to tap into our social nature. So we know that we respond very strongly to what others around us are doing, and particularly people that we think are like us and likely to behave like us. And what O-Power did was include a box on the energy bill that had a bar chart that showed people how much energy they'd consumed, and then compared it to how much their average neighbours consumed and how much their most energy efficient neighbours consumed. And what we saw from these trials was that there was on average 2% decrease in people's household energy use. So really quite significant.
2% may not sound like much, but Eric says think about it. It's cheap and easy.
If you look on the return on investment involved in a 1 or 2% energy consumption reduction with simply changing some, print on a bill, that's a massive return. It's just free energy consumption reduction that anybody who's not engaging in is just derelict for the climate.
And we've actually seen this replicated across multiple countries and contexts. So, for example, the Behavioural Insights team has done a replication of this study in Moldova, and we found very similar effects for households in Moldova. It's also been replicated in Japan. In Japan, they had an anime character called Suratan, which was an air spirit that changes mood depending on how energy efficient your use is. And that kind of cultural adaptation, I think, is a really interesting development in the field of behavioural science.
The key thing is to make lasting change, and with the O-Power example, that appears to be happening. Even when people moved homes and changed energy providers, they were often found to continue to use less energy. So it's not just a short-term thing, it's a new habit.
And Mo says he's seen exactly this sort of thing in Cape Town.
I think the citizens of Cape Town have now been through the threat of day zero. They've adapted their water usage. They've realized what a scarce resource water is. Many households have fitted water tanks that harvest the rainwater. They've drilled boreholes, for example, as well. So people have become very innovative, and I think that's come to stay with Cape Townians.
What started as a nudge to avert a water disaster has also had an impact on the climate because it takes lots of energy to pump, treat and heat water.
Liz Costa says Cape Town offers wider lessons on how to shift behavior. Nudge alone is not the answer.
I think the lesson for policymakers from the Cape Town experience is that one of the reasons it was so successful is that it was an integrated approach. So in Cape Town, there were quite strict restrictions, mandates and fines around water usage. But really behavioural science was used around that to firstly encourage compliance with those measures and secondly to really build a sense of community and shared goals amongst the residents of Cape Town. And I think those are lessons that we can take to many other environmental behaviours and many other countries, and they can be scaled up very successfully.
There's certainly no silver bullet in addressing climate change. What there is a suite of tools that we can bring to change the behaviors that are undermining our future on this planet. And if we bring that entire tool set to the problem, we're far more likely to end up in a situation that we want to be in.
Do you ever worry that nudge puts too much onus on individual responsibility and kind of lets these big decision makers in government and corporations off the hook?
It's largely the demand of consumers that leads corporations to act. So if we want our corporations to act in particular ways, then creating that consumer demand for those different outcomes is really critical.
If these interventions are cheap and easy and they're effective, why aren't they more widespread?
Oftentimes, policymakers make the traditional assumptions that they've made for decades of what actually leads people to engage in different actions, whether they be self-serving or for the collective good. And there is only recently the kind of field of behavioral public policy kind of coming into its own, recognizing that if we want to change people's behaviors, we can't rely on our old assumptions. We need to integrate a new evidence-based understanding of what actually motivates people in the real world. But I think what you do see is that that is changing.
It's early days.
It is. It is early days. They are urgent days. And they are also, it's important to recognize, exciting days. Because we have an opportunity to do something. We have an opportunity to make a difference. This is not doom and gloom. This is the time to act.
What are you doing to reduce your carbon footprint? We'd love to know. Our email is theclimatequestion@bbc.com.
Here's what's new in climate news.
The British Prime Minister Boris Johnson warned leaders at the United Nations Security Council that climate change is a threat to our collective security. But he's been criticised for not taking the issue seriously enough at home. Johnson has approved a new coal mine. Nearly 6,500 kilometres of new roads are being built between now and 2025, and the government signalled it would pull £1 billion worth of funding for green homes. So many are urging Johnson to put his money where his mouth is, or risk humiliating himself when he hosts the world's annual climate conference later this year.
Climate-friendly investing is hitting, quote, fever pitch, according to the Financial Times. The price of renewable energy stocks is soaring. The paper reports that the S&P Clean Energy Index nearly doubled in the last year. Perhaps not surprising in a year that was tied for being the hottest on record. Some are warning of a bubble that could burst and hurt investors, but others say that'd be a small price to pay to speed the shift from fossil fuels.
And if you're interested to hear more about green investment, we've got you covered. Just check out our back catalogue by searching for BBC Climate Question wherever you get your podcasts.
You can let us know what you think of the show by emailing us. The address again, The Climate Question, all one word, at bbc.com. Or leave a review on your podcast app. There is a 5-star option available.
Nice nudging there, Neil.
Thank you. Thanks also to producer Alex Lewis, researcher Zoe Gelber, and our editor Emma Rippon. Tom Brignall did the mix.
This is the BBC World Service, where our Coronavirus Frontline series is following events in Bradford, England.
From the start of the pandemic, we've been given access to medical teams and hear their recordings as events unfold.
Monday, December the 14th, V-Day. There is so much excitement in the hospital as we await delivery of the vaccines.
So this is our COVID vaccine command centre.
But it's clear that anti-vaccine conspiracy theories and fake news on social media are taking hold.
Building a grassroots network of trusted activists to work with communities to dispel myths and lies.
We're trying to fight the source of misinformation.
It's going to be crucial to protect the people who are most at risk.
I was in bed for nearly 10 weeks. I couldn't even move. If I don't take the vaccine now, if I get it again, I won't be here.
Coronavirus Frontline, the search for a vaccine, at bbcworldservice.com/documentaries.
On The Conversation, how do our modern-day ideas influence our understanding of the past? Two researchers, one a Vikings expert and the other a cultural historian with a focus on ancient Greek economy and trade, discuss their groundbreaking work and the risks that come with projecting our own ideas and gender assumptions onto the ancient world. They'll also discuss their passion for digging up the past. That's After the News with me, Kim Chakaneta.
BBC News with Jerry Smith. 2 new charges have been filed against the deposed Burmese leader Aung San Suu Kyi. She appeared in court via video link. It was the first time her lawyers had seen her since she was overthrown a month ago. Demonstrators have been out in the streets of Yangon. Britain has accused China of using Hong Kong's new national security law to stifle political dissent. Dozens of opposition activists are being charged under the law, something the British Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab said violated the Sino-British Joint Declaration on the territory. Health workers in Ivory Coast will be the first to receive the Oxford AstraZeneca COVID vaccine as part of the international COVAX programme aimed at immunising poorer countries. Neighbouring Ghana will start its COVAX programme on Tuesday. Its president is urging citizens to reject conspiracy theories and get jabbed. The fiancé of the late Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi has called for Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman to be punished for his murder. Hatice Cengiz said that if the prince escaped sanction, it would be a stain on humanity. Iran has dismissed allegations from Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu that it caused an explosion that damaged an Israeli ship last week. The US envoy to Afghanistan, Zalmay Khalilzad, has held talks with a senior Afghan official to try to boost the peace process. Mr. Khalilzad met Abdullah to review the US Taliban deal reached 1 year ago. With violence rampant, peace talks between Kabul and the Taliban have stalled. The American road movie Nomadland and its director Chloe Zhao have won the top awards at the Golden Globes. Chadwick Boseman won the prize for Best Actor 6 months after his early death from cancer for his performance in the period blues drama Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. BBC News.
A warm welcome to The Conversation, the show that tells the stories of extraordinary women. I'm Kim Chakaneta. Today we're going to dive into the past. We'll be travelling through space and time, from a bustling Viking town in the south of Sweden to the shores of ancient Greece. When we dig up the past, what can we learn about the women who lived in those times and what role they played? And how do our modern-day beliefs and biases influence our interpretation of the past? Joining me to discuss this topic is Dr. Charlotte Heden-Hanna Jonsson. She is a senior researcher in the Department of Archaeology and Ancient History at Uppsala University in Sweden. She's also one of the lead investigators on the Viking Phenomenon Research Project. And Dr. Sarah Murray, who is an assistant professor at the University of Toronto. She's an archaeologist who specialises in the material culture and institutions of early Greece. Welcome to The Conversation.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Charlotte, I'll start with you. Can gender